Be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. It's proposed that the oral evidence session with Criminal Justice Inspection Northern Ireland on transforming the criminal justice system in Northern Ireland report, the session with the Department of Justice on border security, asylum and immigration bill legislative consent memorandum, and the session with the DOJ on crime policing bill legislative consent memorandum will be recorded by Hansard. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Members, as ever, we're obliged to declare any financial or other relevant interests that might be perceived by others to influence our approaches to matters under consideration. Anybody who's got an interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. Does anybody have any interest they wish to declare at this stage?
No other than member of the Access to Justice All Party Group.
And there's a number of us who fall into that category. I obviously have an immediate family member who works in the legal profession. Danny, are you declaring, or? Oh, he's locked out by broadcasting. We'll get you started with broadcasting. That's you now.
Not let me. No. Is that me? Can you hear me?
You know, yes.
Yes, just declare a immediate family member works for the probation board.
Okay, thank you. Members, we have no apologies beyond the Deputy Chair may have to leave. And on Zoom we have Danny Baker, Doug Beattie and the Deputy Chairperson Deirdre Hargey. Agenda item 2 is draft minutes which are in pages 4 to 15 of your tabled pack. These are the minutes from last week's meeting, Thursday 22nd of May. Are members content that those are a true and accurate reflection of that meeting? Members agreed?
Agreed.
Yes, then I'll sign them. That's great. In terms of matters arising, if I could ask you to turn to pages 17 to 19 of the tabled pack. Just in advance of the evidence session with departmental officials on the 22nd of May on the ASL1 for the Police and Criminal Evidence Northern Ireland Order 1989 Codes of Practice, otherwise known as the PACE codes, a number of questions were provided by the Deputy Chairperson and those have been forwarded to the Department of Justice. As requested during the oral evidence session with officials, the Department has indicated which questions are for it to answer and which are for the PSNI. So all questions for which the Department said that the PSNI has a role in answering were forwarded to the PSNI earlier this week. Can I ask your agreement to note that, and then we'll consider further whenever we've received those responses from the police and the department. Are members content? A couple of other things that I want to flag up. Today, the Deputy Chairperson and I have received a request from the Minister to have an informal meeting with her on Monday with regard to the PACE codes. I was very clear that we do not speak for the committee. The committee will make its own decision, and I wanted obviously to let members know that we'll go and have the meeting and hear what the Minister has to say. I think it would be remiss of us not to do that. If anybody has anything they want us to raise, I think we're fairly clear on what the issues are. If anybody has anything else they want us to raise, we can do that. But and obviously we'll provide a note of what happens at that meeting afterwards, but I didn't want to proceed with that without committee members knowing. We like to be transparent in this committee, and that's what the aim and intention would be. Are members content with that?
Yeah. Content, yeah.
Okay. Right. The other issue then is around the round table event next week. We had asked you last week to confirm your attendance at that. Members haven't really done that thus far, so could I ask people to indicate now whether it is their intention to attend the round table event next week? If it is your intention, could you please raise your hand?
And give my apologies. Last week I'm away in Brussels.
You're in Brussels. That's great. So we've got all 3 members here online and everybody in the room beyond Ciara who's away with our other committee. Yes, I'll follow up with Justin then if he appears, and Morris also. The other issue just around the PACE codes, I think it would be important, bearing in mind some of the issues were raised, that particularly around the gender aspects, that we maybe hear from the PSNI and hear from the Police Federation. Would members be content if we wrote to the PSNI and the Police Federation asking for their views on that? Just to help inform our conversation around the pace codes. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 4 then is, excuse me, transforming the criminal justice system in Northern Ireland, and we're going to have oral evidence from Criminal Justice Inspection, otherwise known as Jacqui. Could I ask members to turn to pages 6 to 24 of the pack, where you'll find the relevant papers. Members, we have with us Jacqui Durkin, who is the Chief Inspector. Jacqui will be familiar to most of you. And David MacAnulty, who is the Lead Inspector with Jacqui. David, you're very welcome. So they're with us to discuss the report, which is Transforming the Criminal Justice System in Northern Ireland, a Strategic Overview. Jacqui and David, you are very welcome. We're very glad to hear from you on this report. It's been a long time coming, so but I think it's timely, bearing in mind responses were due back by the end of this month. Or at least a way forward potentially was supposed to be back by the end of this month. So we look forward to hearing what you have to say. It would be my intention that we would offer the floor to you to provide some opening remarks, after which I presume you're content to take questions from members. Is that all right?
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you.
I'll hand over to you. Thank you, Jacqui.
So, good afternoon, Chair and committee members, and thank you for the invitation to attend today's meeting. I hope you've had the opportunity to read the briefing paper provided, so I was going to make some short remarks before your questions. This inspection was led by David MacAnulty, and he was supported by Maureen Earn and other of our inspectors. This inspection looked at the transformation journey for the criminal justice system in Northern Ireland and the strategic approaches to transformation the Department of Justice, the PSNI, Public Prosecution Service, Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service, Northern Ireland Prison Service, Forensic Science NI and the Probation Board had taken at the time of the inspection. There had been many notable successes, including organisational reform, digital services, technology-enabled data sharing, case processing, video evidence and links. However, the absence of ministers and an assembly, a limited legislative programme, annual budget allocations and the COVID-19 pandemic had an impact on tackling historic issues including delay, victim and witness care and reoffending rates. The inspection team considered a significant number of strategies, programmes and projects that were considered transformative by the inspected organisations at the time of inspection fieldwork, including how these were led and governed. They looked at the Criminal Justice Board's 5 priorities, how they linked together and the intended outcomes, how transformation priorities were communicated across the criminal justice system to everyone who needed to know, and the intended outcomes they would achieve. The competing demands on some leaders to be involved with partner organisations to design and deliver transformation projects or in their own organisations alongside business as usual roles was also identified. Inspectors found that transformation projects and investment in technology in one organisation did not always consider the domino effect or impact on other criminal justice organisations. Inspectors did not find clear evidence of an agreed strategic vision, prioritisation and control of how the end-to-end criminal justice system would be transformed. The strategic recommendation in this report is that the Department of Justice should facilitate Criminal Justice Board members' agreement of a shared future vision and strategic priorities to deliver transformational change and innovation across the criminal justice system, and that these are clearly communicated and reflected in each organisation's corporate and business plans. It's fair to say that this inspection took longer to complete than I hoped and had to be paused to accommodate other unanticipated and planned work and resource issues that needed to be prioritised. Of course, like any inspections, things can change and evolve during the inspection and after report publication. The Programme for Government, published in February this year, provided clear priorities for the criminal justice system, including a focus on speeding up justice and the transformation of public services. When this inspection report was published 6 months ago, the Minister of Justice indicated that she wanted officials to take some time to consider the recommendations. Last Friday afternoon, I received confirmation that from the Department of Justice that the strategic recommendation was accepted and that the development of a vision with a focus on the criminal justice system is at an early stage of development. The second operational recommendation was also accepted and actioned, with each inspected organisation asked to review their own areas and advise the Department of Justice of any issues on completion. The first operational recommendation was for the PSNI, and have been advised that this has not been accepted, and their Strategic Planning and Transformation Department notified the Department of Justice that this is because the terms of reference for the Strategic Transformation Board have it covered. This may be down to the passage of time since the draft report until now, but regardless, if it is working effectively and duplication is being minimised, then this is what the recommendation intended and is welcome. It may be something we return to evaluate at a later date. Transformation is about change for the better. It's never easy, and it's particularly challenging in the criminal justice system, with a diverse range of organisations, professions and individuals with operational independence, funding arrangements, workforces, budgets and governance arrangements that are involved. But that doesn't mean it can't happen and it won't work. People who use and need criminal justice services, our citizens and the people who work in it, deserve a better criminal justice system. I am encouraged by the work underway since the draft inspection report was provided to inspected organisations and now published. I look forward to the outcomes the inspected organisations can achieve together. I hope these remarks are helpful to the committee, and David and I are happy to respond to any questions or comments you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqui. David, have you anything to add, or has Jacqui covered it for you?
No, she's covered it all, thank you.
That's great, thank you very much. Members, to have anybody indicating? Doug.
Thank you, Chair, and Jacqui, thank you as ever, a clear and very concise report, as they always are. Can I just ask you, it's a viewpoint, but also factually from what you're finding, you did say the inspectors did not find clear evidence of an agreed vision. That's not the first time I've heard that, because this was also what was said when the review of the policing board was undertaken, that there was no clear vision. It was like a two-legged stool or a parent-child relationship. Where do you think it's falling down? Is it purely because the board is so disparate in what they're trying to achieve, or is it a leadership issue from the various different factions of it? Where can we pinpoint it to try and bring it all together?
Well, I don't think the Criminal Justice Board is dysfunctional. I think, if anything, it's probably operating better than it has in a very long time, where you have leaders on the Criminal Justice Board who are fixed with responsibility for delivering against each of the 5 priorities. I think it is difficult because, as you know, you have uniformed organisations, you have organisations with bigger budgets and different reporting and governance and accountability responsibilities, and then you have some very civil service based organisations. You have a number of organisations that are operationally independent of each other, but all funded obviously by the taxpayer and mainly by the Department of Justice, other than the PPS, which, as you know, is funded by the Department of Finance. So I think it is, it's timely. I'm more interested in looking forward, to be honest, than looking back. I think there's an appetite now to actually do something with this, and the Minister has confirmed that officials will be working with organisations to do that. I think you have mentioned it before to me, Doug, about statutory time limits, and that we don't have them in Northern Ireland, and the focus on what's really important here. I know there's a lot of discussion and debate about whether they're useful or not, and in England and Wales they're not without their problems. But I really think this is an opportunity when there are tight budgets, and it's very clear that historic issues in the criminal justice system, like delay and really good victim and witness care, need to be tackled, and tackled effectively.
And I guess, Jacqui, where I was going with this is that, for example, I met with the Director of Public Prosecutions yesterday. I think they're doing an exceptional job in really difficult circumstances. So as an organisation, I think that they're exceptional, and I can go to each organisation and say something similar. They're all exceptional. My concern is how we blend them together. What is the mechanism to make them all operate together so that one complements the other, as opposed to feeling like these disparate organisations all wanting the same thing but not necessarily working towards a shared vision?
I think lots of organisations, and what David and the inspection team and I found through this inspection was there's a lot of competing priorities in the system, where organisations who have their own budget and their own in-house priorities, and then they're trying to act collaboratively and cohesively with other organisations as well. So I think there is a bit of that silo mentality, but they do have genuinely effective partnerships at a very strategic level, but how that filters down into an organisation that is managing to deliver business as usual every day, as well as play their part in a real and a true and authentic partnership, where you consider what's happening at one end of the system, and if you bring in new technology or you invest in something, what's the ripple effect of that for when it gets to prosecution or when it gets into court. So those are the sorts of things that I think, if there was an agreed vision with agreed priorities, then it would be clear to everyone, if there is funding available, this is what's really important and what we're going to do.
Yeah, and Jacqui, sorry, just the very last one then. But why do you think there's not an agreed vision then? Because clearly that's fundamental. You know, you have to have a vision in order to set a direction, so everybody's in the same lane, aiming for the same thing. So why have we not had a vision? Is it historical? Is it the fact is that Stormont was down for such a long period of time? Is it a combination of things? So why did we not have that vision?
I think it was just something that wasn't because of the different governance and funding and organisational arrangements in place. I mean, theoretically, Northern Ireland, we're very fortunate. We have one police force, you know, we've one prosecution service. So the ability to do it in a jurisdiction this size was always there. I think now it's the focus, and maybe it's part of the lessons learned since the pandemic, of showing what you can achieve when you act together quickly and collaboratively in a crisis, to say, right, we're not going to be able to do everything, but what can we do? And what are we agreed on? What do we want this system to do? What do we want it to look like? What is really important to citizens? And I think this is an opportunity. And certainly one that has come along, you know, should have been here before, but this is where we are, and I'm more interested in looking forward and what can be achieved.
And if I can, just very, very briefly at the end, then, check, because I'm looking forward to, I want to look forward as well. And one of the big things we have to look forward is making sure that the people have confidence in the system that you're talking about. I think that's one of the biggest things, and how do we create that confidence? And I think that vision creates that confidence, because it's waned over this last number of years. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't compromise anybody's independent decision making in any organisation, whether they're operationally independent like the police, or independent in their decision making like the Public Prosecution Service, or indeed the judiciary. Every organisation has its own governance arrangements and corporate and business plans, or a policing plan and priorities. But this is an opportunity, I think, for the system to really come together and to explain to citizens and users of the criminal justice system, and importantly the staff within it. Because sometimes you'll have leaders that, if they're in organisations, that if they're not directly involved in a transformation projects or programme boards, they feel a bit out of the room and they're not included. And this is an opportunity, I think, to bring all the key leaders together to say, this is what's really important, this is what we've decided. And yes, to be honest, Doug, not having, you know, a new and refreshed programme for government for some years, and not having the opportunity to bring forward legislation, some of it really, you know, to support innovative work, but some of it to do the boring but necessary legislation to keep pace with what was happening in other jurisdictions, that we have felt, you know, the impact of that. So I think this is an opportunity with a new programme for government, a new Department of Justice corporate and business plan, and each organisation saying, right, that's kind of the North Star, that's what we need to be looking to, and have that agreed vision for. It's good for staff, it's good for citizens, it's good for everyone to know, right, that's what we're all working towards, and be very clear in the intent, not a bit of, if I dare say, not a bit of waffle, but something that's, you know, meaningful, and what will really deliver high quality services right across the system.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jacqui. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Doug, thank you. I have Ciara, Connie, and then Deirdre. Ciara?
Yeah, thank you, Jacqui and David, for coming along today and for sharing the report back in November. Both just two areas I want to look at, and it is about looking forward as well. and I'm conscious in bringing that collaborative approach. It takes time, building relationships, trust, but I think likewise what drives it is resources. So just in relation to, obviously, John O'Dowd had announced the successful DOJ transformation monies in relation to speeding up justice and the electronic monitoring project. So I'm just wondering what conversations maybe you've had with the Minister in respect of this work, and how maybe these projects might help to address and drive forward that collaborative working and shared vision. So that would be one question. And then secondly, I just want to focus in on obviously the prison population at the minute, and there was the serious concerns in relation to the current prison population, particularly like 79% repeat offenders. So it'd just be useful to hear your views on how effective, and I know we did visit and seen some of the rehabilitation programmes that have been delivered in the prison, which is really good. So just in relation to the rehabilitation programmes within prisons, how do you think that will help in delivering transformational change? And then likewise, just looking forward as well regarding the huge numbers and the forthcoming perhaps prison overcrowding, and likewise kind of staffing capacity and complex needs of a lot of the prisoners, just in relation to moving forward and transformation. Just to hear your thoughts on that as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start off, and then if there's anything I've missed, David can elaborate on that. So in relation to the transformation projects, I haven't had any direct conversation with the Minister, but I have had conversations with officials, and in fact we had some officials come to one of CGI's team meetings to brief us on what was happening in relation to some of those transformation projects. So I think it's clear that what's intended around taking out of court disposals, and we have an inspection will be published later this year around we looked at community resolution notices and the use of out of court disposals. So we're looking at, committal reform and how it's progressed to a degree, but what else needs to happen. We're interested in the governance arrangements around that, and my understanding is that funding is dependent year on year on what you've actually achieved each year. So I think it'll be really important to have really effective wraparound governance arrangements to make sure that things are progressing as they should. And that money is spent well, and I think that's what the Minister of Finance expects, and certainly the Minister of Justice I think would expect as well. So we will be keeping we would have regular meetings with officials to keep up to date with what was happening with those, and I know that not prison service, but the Director of Reducing Offending is leading on the electronic tagging project as well. So I think we certainly need to keep informed about what's happening with those, and if it's relevant to an inspection, we would be engaging with officials on those and what's happening. On the prison population, yes, absolutely. I was in Hydebank 2 days ago, and the female population, which has been a concern for some time, I think it was sitting at 112 that day. There are issues with reoffending rates, there are issues with recall as well, so people who are out in licence who can't comply or don't comply with their licence arrangements. So it's not just about who the court is sending to prison, it's also about recall rates as well. And our inspection of the parole commissioners commented on that too, and some work needed to be done to understand why that was happening. I'm aware that the Director of Reoffending, or Reducing Offending, has commissioned a review of the prisoner development units, and that hasn't, as far as I know, reported yet. I think that will be really important in understanding the model of provision, or how their needs are addressed and what it takes for them to be well supported when they return to the community, so that they get access to those programmes in prison while they're in custody, to better equip them when they return to the community, to help them support and give them a chance to make better choices or gain employment. So there's a lot of things going on at the minute, but that's not to say the challenges in wider society don't reflect what's happening in the prison population. You know that as well as I do. Where housing is an issue, where the cost of living is an issue, if somebody doesn't get access to programmes to address addictive behaviours, then you're really setting them up for failure if they're not well supported in the community. They might have that support in custody, but it's the follow through is really important. So there's a couple of reviews that have been commissioned by the Department of Justice, and we are looking forward to seeing those. We know that the Prisoner Development Unit in all the prisons has suffered from abstraction because of the numbers on wings and the need to maintain security. So I think it's a bit like neighbourhood policing, where do you go to get additional resource when you need it? So this review that's coming up, will be hopeful, will say, this is the model that you need to maintain, because there are ramifications if prisoners don't get access to this work before they leave, then you're heightening the risk of them returning to custody.
Just in relation to the rehabilitation stuff, did you see any major gaps? It just currently doesn't exist within the prison service for particular needs of people?
Well, I think there's a big waiting list for access to addiction services, and that's well known and reported on. But I think there's a wider piece about actually resourcing the model of provision and who gets access to what when they are in custody. And I think that's something that the prison service know themselves, that if they need people because of the volume of people they have in detention, and we know with some with very, very complex needs, and I could see that myself even in Ash House, during the week, some really complex individuals that if they are not really well supported in the community, unfortunately there's a heightened risk that they return to custody because there's nowhere else for them to go. So people who have really quite obvious learning challenges, neurodiversity, and say maybe with addiction issues, coping with them in a prison environment is difficult for them. It's also very difficult for the staff, and we recognise that.
Just finally, just in relation to the staff, and obviously given the range of complex needs, and what the staff have to be faced with in trying to do the best that they can to support those individuals, was there any glaring capacity issues regarding staff, or even with regards to training and development and support for staff within the prison service?
Not that in honesty, not that I could see, certainly in Hyde Bank, Secure College and Women's Prison. But as you know, it's something that we'll always be aware of in looking at Magabry and McGilligan. I think Magabry, because of the sheer scale and size of it, and because you have a very high remand population. So when you talk about, the ability to engage prisoners in behavioural programmes or programmes to address offending behaviours, So those are the sorts of things that if resources are really tight, then what can you pause because you need to deploy staff elsewhere?
Thank you.
Okay, Ciara, thank you. Connie?
Yeah, thank you for coming in today. Just on the recommendations that you've outlined for us, I think my first thought was a lot of them are very high level. You've got the strategic recommendations, but even the operational ones mention things like strategic priorities and project boards. And I think I'd be really interested to hear a bit more about how you feel that impacts people in the criminal justice system, particularly victims of crime, and interested to know whether you do any work with organisations that support people in the justice system, such as Victims Support or Commissioner for Victims of Crime as well.
I'll let you answer that one, Dave.
Well, I will start with the high-level recommendations. This was a high-level look at across the justice system. So you can imagine it's quite a complex area of work where we're looking across all the strategic directions of each of the organisations. So to distill that down, we wanted to see, well, what's the best way we can offer assistance to them to help them improve. What we came across was a lot of strategies, a lot of meetings, a lot of people, and a lot of duplication. Some of it was internally, a lot of it was internally focused. So what we wanted to do when it became the recommendations was to make sure that, well, you've tried lots of things. We're not seeing the outcomes have changed that much. In fact, you could argue that the rates have maybe got a bit worse in terms of end-to-end process and length of time and experience of victims and witnesses. commensurately. So the recommendations was, well, what strategic recommendation that we could offer that would improve the entire system? And that means reducing the number of areas that you're going to be looking at. Let's focus on what are the main targets that you can identify that will actually improve the justice system. And that will mean, through transformation, working together. Everyone that we spoke to at a senior level, all of them were very keen to transform. Everyone is aware of the benefits of working together and transforming. The difficulty is, bringing them together. That's the difficult part. So this is an attempt at a strategic level to bring them together as best we could to ensure that it's better for victims and witnesses, that they improve. There's some tangible benefits for everybody. They say that if delay is one of the big issues you're going to target, well, what are the things that you can work together? Instead of working independently at a strategic level, let's work together strategically.
And just on that, in between, when you publish your reports and do your inspections, what's your working relationship like with the Department of Justice to almost ensure that the recommendations are taken forward, but also evaluating those as well? Do you do that in between inspections, and how does that relationship sort of look?
Just if I can add as well, David, and you mentioned as well about victim support and the Victims Commissioner. We are grateful for having really positive relationships with Victim Support and the Victims Commissioner and with other organisations who can help inform inspection evidence through lived experience, because that's vital. When we're doing inspection, there's a direct impact on victims and witnesses. No matter what the subject is, it's really important that we try and get that voice in a sensitive way, and we're always kind of conscious that sometimes speaking to inspectors isn't an option, but Victim Support and the Victims Commissioner can give us real-time issues that they're hearing, examples of cases and things that have happened, or maybe systemic issues that they want to bring to our attention. And I would certainly, through the annual consultation on the inspection programme, speak to each of them and speak to a range of voluntary and community sector organisations as well, because they have contemporary information about what's happening and the experience of victims and witnesses in the criminal justice system. So they are, for us, our one of our key stakeholders, and we certainly value the time that they give to us. And Women's Aid, NSPCC, Men's Advisory Project and the Older Persons Commissioner, those are go-to people who we know will give us authentic information about what's happening and what they're seeing. Sorry, what was the other question that you asked about?
Around how you ensure any recommendations that you make are then taken forward by DOJ, and how that relationship works, and evaluation of them as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have positive working relationships and professional working relationships, but I can't say that we agree on everything, and that's okay. That's the way it's meant to be for an independent inspectorate. Sometimes we won't get responses to recommendations in a time that would work for us, so we would ask for an action plan after a report to say, can you confirm what you're accepting and what action you're taking on fit of this? And sometimes if we get an action plan and we think, well, you might want to have another look at that, doesn't really address the recommendation, then we would follow up on that, and we would do that when we need to. But in terms of monitoring and ongoing monitoring, so we would do a small number of follow-up reviews where I consider, it's in discussion with the team, but I would decide, right, where are the higher risk areas, where are the things that we really want to go back and see what's happened there. The Department of Justice have their own annual monitoring of report recommendations, but it's based on self-reporting by the inspected organisations about what they deemed to be achieved or implemented or not implemented. And sometimes it's obvious to us that you want to kind of find out a bit more information about what's happening, and we can do that. And I want to pilot something in this next business year around looking at more kind of self-assessment and more depth of self-assessment, and see where that takes us, rather than do a full follow-up review, which can be quite time-consuming. Is there something we can do in the meantime? Because we can't possibly follow up on every inspection report and every recommendation. And indeed, when we do prison inspections, we will go back and look at previous recommendations or priority or key concerns that were raised and see what progress has been made against those, and we would report them in those sorts of inspection reports.
Thank you both. Thanks.
Thank you, Connie. Deirdre?
Yeah, thanks very much. Just for your evidence so far, and I suppose I just wanted to touch on the kind of key recommendations that you laid out in the strategic one, where you had said within 6 months of publication of the report for the Criminal Justice Board, obviously, to start to have that shared vision and strategic priorities at that level. So from my estimation, that was to be completed by May, and it's just to see if there's been an update on the recommendations that you've made.
Yes, so when we had permission to publish the report, the Minister had indicated that she wanted officials to take some time to consider the recommendations and obviously needed to speak to other criminal justice organisations to do that. So last Friday I got confirmation that the strategic recommendation had been achieved and the one operational recommendation that was relevant, system-wide. So we would anticipate hopefully to see something around that. I know the department is working on a new corporate plan and business plan and has indicated that they have started work on the development of a vision and priorities. So I would be hopeful we'll see that soon, but the finished product isn't available yet.
Yeah, and I suppose it just follows on to my other point around just when I was hearing yourself and David talk there, because the siloed approach would be a concern, that I think even the committee has been looking at, not just within the broader justice system, but even working across departments as well, in terms of obviously the correlation between health and justice pertaining to the prison population particularly, and the concern that there's not enough joint up working and teams working collaboratively together, not just communicating, but doing more. So I'm just concerned, would you say that there's too much of a focus still on strategy rather than outcomes?
Well, I don't think you can have one without the other. I think to achieve outcomes, you need to be very clear through your strategy what it is you're trying to do and then how you're going to get there. I think a big issue is that there's a lot of activity, but is it all channeled and geared to a very clear outcome, or what are we trying to do? So we know that there's huge delay in the system. We know what some would term as a backlog since the pandemic. For me, I think it's more kind of, well, this is the workload and what are we going to do to reduce it, and what are we going to do to reduce delay for victims and witnesses, but also for defendants. So people are sitting long periods on remand. Some of them may end up with a custodial sentence or may not, or may be time served. And so when they're on remand, you can't do that work with them. That means they're really going to meaningfully address their offending behaviour. So, that's just one part of the system. So, and this report commented that, the much was being done by the few. We're a relatively small constituency of senior leaders with the expertise to inform and make decisions. So when you have those, that significant number of programme boards and working groups, it's usually, the similar or same people who are fielded to sit on those. And often those leaders, particularly in smaller organisations, are doing a day job as well. So if we can't do everything, then there needs to be a prioritisation of what is really important, what is going to be focused on, and how you're going to do it, and who you're going to do it with. And I think that's something for organisations to consider, and the operational recommendation backs that up as well, is to do that horizon scanning and say, right, if we have a clear vision, agreed vision and a priority, then how are we going to resource that? If there is funding available, where is it going to go? And as I say, there is that domino effect where you might have one organisation where something is hugely important to them, but they maybe haven't engaged in a meaningful and a detailed way with other organisations to say, well, if I invest in this piece of technology, what will it mean for you further down the line? Because there's a huge amount of churn in the criminal justice system in terms of adjournment levels and cases that are waiting for way too long. So how do you take some of that churn where you pass from one organisation, passes on cost and delay potentially to another organisation. How do you try and reduce that? You'll never eradicate it, but how do you reduce it? And meaningfully working together, I think, is an important part of that. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. There's, the Courts and Tribunal Service are working on their new Themis system. So that's going to be, and has involved engagement with a wide range of stakeholders. There's a new procurement for the Causeway system. So it's about looking to the art of the possible and future investment. What do you want those systems to do in the future to support the criminal justice system?
Yeah, so just a sharper focus then, you would think, on outcomes then, in terms of trying to streamline and to have the achievements rather than just on the strategy per se. Because I suppose some of the issue is, I mean, we would like to see this reflected in the business plan. Obviously, departments are doing 5 year kind of plans now in terms of budgets and stuff as well. And obviously, with a comprehensive spending review, we're going to move hopefully to a 3-year budget cycle. So that should give that certainty over a longer period rather than year-on-year funding. Because obviously money has one part of it. But my concern is it's not the overall issue. You know, it is that siloed approach. So I'm just wondering, Jacqui, is it one of the areas you're going to come back to then in terms of seeing how the department is progressing this, and, trying to sharpen the focus at the outcome end?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing the vision and priorities that are developed, and it's something that certainly, we may well comment on. And I would imagine if that is agreed, it's something that will become a reference for us to, well, what's the declared and agreed strategy and governance approach? Where does this fit into the programme for government and supporting the programme for government outcomes? So it absolutely will be something that we would look to. I don't know whether at this stage, I don't know if it's something that would benefit from a follow-up review, and it needs, in some ways, it's totally understandable. There need to, the programme for government's published, the department wants a bit of time to consider what the vision might be, but there is a sense of, right, now we have that, we sort of need to get on with it. And I think the department's new corporate and business plan is an opportunity to demonstrate the commitment to that.
And have they given a timeline then for that to come back? Have they said within 3 months, 6 months?
No, there's no timeline, but it's indicated that work was in progress.
I suppose that's an area we can probe then as the committee.
Yep.
In terms of asking that. No, that's great, because the other issue around the figure that Ciara quoted in terms of the 79% of the prison population classified as repeat offenders, and obviously that is a concern. We are aware of the pressures on the system, and we've seen the largest increase certainly in a decade and almost a decade in terms of reaching their highest numbers. And obviously we did do a joint committee meeting with health as well. So again, it's this siloed approach. And I'm just wondering, in that 79% figure, is there a breakdown of that in terms of remand prisoners and those, that have had a sentence, or would you have that information? Because I suppose that, you touched on the point that in remand they don't get the rehabilitation. And that would be part of the concern as well, or they don't have to engage in it. And obviously we're seeing huge numbers on remand with the delays, and many with mental health issues. So I'm just wondering, in your work in terms of not just the department and the kind of all the justice partners having a vision, is there enough joint working being done with other departments, i.e. health being one of the main ones?
Well, there's a couple of things there, and certainly in terms of the remand population, I wouldn't have the breakdown of that 79%, how many were on remand. What I can say is that roughly about half, 40% of the prison population, certainly in Magabry, would be on remand. McGilligan, as you know, isn't a remand prison. There'd be very few, if any, remand prisoners in McGilligan, and in Hydebank Secure College and Women's Prison, about half the women are on remand, slightly less so, I think, of the young men, though I could be wrong. In terms of why that is or what's available and working with health, well, we know there are very few alternatives to custody where someone who is a danger to themselves or a danger to others. And so people are remanded in custody sometimes for lack of having an address that they can be bailed to. or there may be a concern of there's no provision, and part of that is about, well, where is there? We know it's an issue, and particularly in regard to children, but adults as well. Where are the options? There are no bail hostels in Northern Ireland. There is no provision to say, well, if that person can't go back home because actually the offence with which they're charged relates to the home environment, well, then where are they going to go? And as I say, it was very obvious to me, and it has been for some time, having been in and out of different prisons and having been in approved premises, that there are people who have, the system in some ways, whether it's through education, they might have a additional needs or special educational needs that have never been picked up in the community. And yet they end up in prison, and they are very much starting from, trying to get them to self-declare if they can, or to get the support that they need. So there is, when people are in short sentences as well, or maybe they do eventually get bail, it's very difficult to kind of get to those issues and say, how do we make sure that you don't come back here? What sort of supports do you need in the community, and are those supports available? Whether that's, family support that may or may not be available, whether it's, other types of support to make sure that they stop offending and don't come back to detention. So there absolutely are, there are connections to health, there are connections to education, there are connections to the Department for Communities, and at the end of the day, as we would often say, people are usually in prison. The vast majority of people in prison are there for a short period of time. They're coming out into the community, to your GP surgery, their children are coming to your school. The issues that they have and the help that they need is apparent to very many people, but it's not always available.
And I suppose for me, it's that pathway before they're released then to make sure that that's done, rather than just releasing them on a day and they've none of these issues resolved. So if there's not that coordinated approach across the different departments, then there is that increased potential of finding themselves back in there again.
Yeah,
so I suppose it's the preventative piece that, I would be keen to look at.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, it's better than it was, because you might be aware that, the Lady Chief Justice changed the High Court bail hearing day from a Friday to a Thursday, so that there wouldn't be people left in limbo, maybe released from prison and no access or contact with services over the weekend, which creates lots of risks and vulnerabilities for them. I think there are support and advice available in prison for people on release. I do think, I'm not saying in any way, shape or form it's perfect, but I do think it's better than it was, and more awareness of what happens after release. But it's about making sure that people are willing to engage in that process as well.
Yeah, and I suppose it's just trying to understand then, in terms of discussions or changes that commenced following the ongoing, I suppose, conversations, Jacqui, around the key 3 recommendations. So I know you've made your report, you said you'll keep a watching brief on the strategic stuff. You may do a review, is it on certain parts of it again, or in other areas? So just to get a wee sense of what's next.
Yeah.
And what that ongoing engagement potentially with the department and the broader criminal justice family looks like.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly on the operational recommendation relating to the PSNI and their strategic transformation board, I mean, the intention is that they will provide the governance and oversight to make sure and reduce or eradicate duplication of what transformation projects that are happening in different parts of the PSNI. So that's certainly something we can explore in future inspections with the PSNI if it's on a relevant subject. I wouldn't necessarily go in to do a follow-up review just on that. I think I'm hoping it'll become very apparent to all of us when we have that vision and the priorities, that when we go to look at any issue that's related to strategy within the criminal justice system, it should become very apparent where that fits in and the outcomes that are being achieved against it, and how resources are being mapped to it as well, to make sure that there aren't just words, there's actually actions attached to it and successes arising from it.
Yeah, and thank you. My last wee one just was around children and young people, obviously, because it is a big concern. And we're obviously looking at the justice bill at the moment, which will make some changes in terms of bail and custody. But it's just to get, I suppose, your assessment at the moment. Do you feel that the system is working in the interests of children and young people?
Well, the short answer to that one is no. I think we reported and have repeatedly reported the need for woodlands not to be used as a place of safety, the presumption of bail and the availability of alternatives, and those alternatives are not yet available. So I don't think it is, necessarily, a child-centred approach. I think that's where connections, really good, strong connections to social services and alternative options for children is essential. But we're not there yet.
I know, Nikki, I know they've made some recommendations even in terms of youth disposals and looking at statutory time frames and stuff. So it's just to see if any of those issues have come up in terms of any of the work that you have done.
Well, we would certainly speak to Chris and his team periodically as well, and would be aware of some of the issues that they're dealing with. We're in the course of an inspection of the minute on child criminal exploitation and a follow-up to our child sexual exploitation review. And some of those issues are becoming apparent as well, particularly with children who are in care. And so, we'll be publishing that report in due course, and I would expect the committee might be interested in it as well.
And I'm wondering, on the back of that, again, getting back to the siloed approach and the kind of joined up working, do you think there's enough usage of the Children's Services Cooperation Act in terms of that collaboration?
It would be really difficult, to be honest, Deirdre, for me to make an assessment of that. What I would say is that it would be well known, I think, among inspectors that are engaged in inspectors that that cooperation between and sharing of information, which we know has been an issue for a long time, and we looked at it in terms of pilot on child safeguarding that we did in the Southern Trust area, is about making sure that everybody should know, and the safeguarding of children is paramount, so everybody who should know does know in a timely way, and that child is protected. So I think there's no doubt it needs to be it needs to be more apparent how it's being used, I would say that.
Okay, no, that's great. Thanks very much for that.
Okay, Deirdre, thank you, Morris.
Very much, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. You alluded there a few minutes ago to the small pool of talent you have. How do you think that'll translate in terms of perhaps delaying or a stop-start approach to transformation of justice? And will you be able to second other members to your team from other agencies or indeed any cross-agency placements?
Yeah. So I think what I commented on the small pool of talent was about the organisations that we inspected and looked at, and that they were, leaders were spread thinly sometimes, and not only, involved in the strategic direction and governance of their own organisation, but in those cross criminal justice system issues that they were involved in. Obviously, David's sitting beside me, and I wouldn't infer for 1 second that we had a small pool of talent. We're a very small team where we need additional support for inspections or expertise, whether that's forensics or whether it's support from other inspectorates. We would try and get that those people involved and that expertise involved and funded where we can. But in relation to criminal justice organisations, I think one of the things that this inspection report points to is that people were spread thin, in that they were involved in a lot of different programme boards and working groups and project teams, but also had a day job to do. And I think the prioritisation through the vision and priorities that the Criminal Justice Board agree that should follow, that where that resource is used and used well, or what they can do, rather than trying to do everything at the same time. David, I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, it was about getting more of a streamlined approach to how using your talent that you have well. From our own talent viewpoint, we were a very experienced inspection team, and we're very fortunate, I would say that, of course. But yeah, we are exceptionally good at what we do because we've been doing it for so long. We have a broad range of experience, and we are good at picking up these things because we go into each of the organisations, and we're unique because we can see each of it from a different perspective. So whenever we make these strategic recommendations, we're looking at a bigger picture, and we're seeing that you have a small cadre of professionals who can make real change. So we really want to encourage them. We want to provide a platform for them to have some sort of accountability, set a direction where you can have outcomes linked to your direction.
Thank you very much. Just one minor question. That's about evaluating and reporting back. Do you think that you will be providing reports back to this committee on a regular basis so that we can perform our role of scrutinisers?
Well, we would always, and like Chair would be aware, we would always offer to brief committee on any specific report or any issues that you have about criminal justice inspection work, and we're very happy to do that, either on an individual report or on any wider issues that you would want to speak to us about, whether that's in committee or whether it's with individual members to brief on a particular report, and we're more than happy to do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Morris. Sorry. So usually I go at the end. I have to say, I think this is one of the most damning reports that I've ever read. And I really welcome it because I think it's incredibly useful for us as a committee to see this broad overview of what is going on holistically within the system. So I welcome that, and I've got a number of points that I want to make, as well as a number of questions I wish to ask, if that's all right. If you'll just bear with me, because I was writing things down also as you were speaking, both of you. Could I firstly ask, when was the last time you conducted such an inspection?
We've never, and
So
this is the first time
This
we've
is the
done
first time there's been an overview of the entire kind of criminal justice system.
Yeah.
in relation to transformation. Yeah.
We've looked at various areas of each of the organisations to how they run strategically, but not as a combined overview.
And I think this has been incredibly useful, and it was vital for the committee to read this. There's a couple of points that I want to read out so that it's actually on the record. So at paragraph 4.3 of the report provided us, it says, inspectors found that transforming justice required effective planning, resources and development of policies and strategies that address key issues across the criminal justice system rather than focusing on single organisational priorities and improvement agendas. There was a lack of collectively agreed vision and strategic priorities shared by the DOJ and the key criminal justice organisations. This presented a barrier to delivering transformative change in the criminal justice system. The next paragraph is equally difficult. The inspection team found that transformation strategies and approaches were focused primarily on individual internal improvement, and I think we've all witnessed that. Organisations then presented these individual approaches as evidence of system-wide transformation. Inspectors did not consider these to be system-wide transformation and found the changes were made because they were affordable and served individual organisational needs. On occasion, what delivered an efficiency for one organisation could create a pressure elsewhere. And I think it's really important that that is included in your report, because it's also what we have been hearing from some of the organisations themselves, perhaps not in this formal setting, but in the conversations that we have offline. Inspectors identified a need for more meaningful collaboration with other criminal justice organisations. And then at 4.7, since the devolution of policing and justice matters to the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive 15 years ago, inspectors found there had been limited improvement in the overall performance of the criminal justice system, the experience of victims, witnesses and defendants, or those working within it. At the time of inspection fieldwork, the available data showed that, while acknowledging the pandemic-related issues, criminal cases continue to take too long end to end, with 90% of all cases in 2022-23 completed in 796 days, compared to 520 days in 2018-19. Now, as you say, Jacqui, I mean, you know, we hear, oh, we're moving to improve committal reforms. They've been moving on committal reform for 10 years and we're no further on. Here, I mean, they talk about the COVID backlog. I think you're absolutely right. I think it is workload. And at this stage, to be honest, to see an increase of what's that, a couple of 100 days plus, That's not symptomatic of me, of a system that's improving. So a couple of points that I wanted to make, and then others that I wrote down. I'm disappointed that you heard from them last Friday, but you have not heard about an action plan or even a time frame, because I don't believe that that's acceptable. And I do believe that this issue of how things are working all together will be something that this committee wants to drill down into, and I think we'll move on, that we'll speak to that later on. But so they gave you nothing in terms of an action plan or a time frame, despite the fact that what was agreed was that they'd come back within 6 months.
Well, the indication from the correspondence I had was that work was underway, but there certainly wasn't a definite time frame. I would suspect that it's linked to programme for government and for a new Department of Justice corporate plan and business plan, but obviously the department are the best people to respond to that. I think there is a difficulty where you have a board that is a collection of individuals that all have different priorities and operational independence and all of those things, as you well know, where you have the judiciary, the police, the director of public prosecutions, the permanent secretary and departmental officials, and you have the director in the courts and tribunal service on the criminal justice board. I'm not saying it shouldn't have been done before now, but this is where we're at, and I think there's an appetite that wasn't there before to actually do something about it. So I'm choosing to remain positive, to say this is an opportunity to do what should have been done probably quite some time ago, but it's about moving forward.
I think that's fair enough, but I think in order to learn going forward, we need to take a look at what has gone on for the past 15 years. So I'm not prepared to just move into I'm going to look forward space. I want to understand what has gone wrong and why it has taken 15 years to reach this point. I can't believe there hasn't been anything done on it thus far, and especially so when we've got reports in front of us today about the economic impact of crime, and crime costs Northern Ireland £3.4 billion a year. And the cost of reoffending is £373.3 million, and that was from a couple of years ago. So, I mean, it strikes me that it's astonishing that the department hasn't, especially whenever there is a mechanism like the Criminal Justice Board, kind of got itself by the scruff, and that even in one department, they're not pulling in the one direction. They don't have agreed strategic priorities, never mind across the organisations. Because what we've seen is, I mean, we have an expectation that there will be collaboration with health, but we've already seen, we had a report with us last week that indicated that there were so many strategies. There was a whole raft of, it was about mental health provision within the criminal justice system. And what that demonstrated was they didn't have the resources to take through a number of the recommendations. Therefore, they were superseded by strategies that came further down the line. But more importantly than that, there was so much bickering between the departments over who was the lead and who should take the lead. The whole raft of these things weren't progressed. But in the meantime, it is the victim, it is the witness, it is the defendant, and people who work in the system who suffer. And that's what concerns me. So I'm glad to see your work. As you progress through all of this, I do think that you need to go back. You're saying that you anticipate it will become apparent through the PFG. I'm not so sure, because the 15 years previously I mean, there have been a number of PFGs. So I think that we do need to look at that. If you do go in and look at future inspections, either in the broad brush of the entire system or as at each individual organisations, will you be looking at collaboration as part of this now to see what's going on further up the chain, to give you a means of assessing?
So every thematic inspection that we would undertake, regardless of the topic, we would always look at strategy and governance. So we'll look at that organisation and at their governance arrangements, at their accountability arrangements. We'll look at what have they publicly declared they're going to focus on and achieve, and what targets or actions or outcomes they have. So that's, one of the tenets of what we look at in every inspection. So we look at strategy and governance, we look at delivery, and we look at outcomes. And we report, our inspection reports are structured around that. So we'll always look to the highest point or the most kind of overriding collaborative strategy that there is in place, and programme for government for Northern Ireland is obviously key to that. But falling from that are the corporate plans, whether it's in the criminal justice system, so whether it's the Department of Justice or it's the police service or whatever organisation it happens to be. You're looking for linkages onto how what they're doing contributes to what's been agreed as government's priorities and outcomes that they intend to see. So when I said that we would look at that in any topic or any inspection, that we would always look for that framework of strategy and governance when we do an inspection.
Yes, every thematic inspection that as an inspection team we look at, that's the place we go to. What was in place beforehand. So if I go into do a thematic, I will look at I've done this inspection. How does this feed into what I'm looking at now? We have reported on this consistently since inception of CJI, that what it requires is interdepartmental work and inter-organisational working, teams working better within teams. We've been saying this all along. This is just a bigger version of that. It's a strategic version of this. But yeah, we look at this all the time.
We would also cross-reference to other inspection reports. So if we're doing a particular inspection and there are relevant recommendations from another inspection report, we would cross-reference to those as well, which is why I said I think this will feature again in the future when it becomes apparent. Because if this is the stated intent for the criminal justice system, then that's something we would always be live to in future inspections.
Just as you've mentioned that, one of your previous recommendations under the your last one about the Police Ombudsman's Office investigation of abusive position concerns and complaints, your strategic recommendation there was, and I've asked this of the department, I'm still waiting for the answer, within 3 months of publication of this report, the Office of the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland and the Department of Justice should work together to improve their relationship and finalise a partnership agreement. Is that something that is particular to the Ombudsman's Office, or did you see evidence of this throughout the other organisations on this inspection?
Well, that inspection, as you've said, was relevant to the Office of the Police Ombudsman, and that was the finding in relation to that inspection. So, partnership agreements are organisations that have that arm's length relationship with the department, and what we found was that they could be improved in terms of the clarity around what the department would do and what the Police Ombudsman's Office would do. So again, that's a relatively recently published inspection, and it may be something that we return to through a follow-up review.
Just in terms of the issue there, about, I suppose, some difficulties, and you felt a partnership agreement would be beneficial in those circumstances.
Oh.
In the course of this inspection, did you see any similar themes or patterns that you think where you think relationships need to be worked on, or maybe there would be benefit to a partnership agreement?
I think not. Well, the partnership agreement is kind of like the old management framework, where you set out very clearly, this is what the department will do and expects from you, and this is what you will do as an arm's length body with the public money that we're giving you, and what you're expected to do with it, and the governance standards that you're required to work to. I think it's more in terms of what we saw in this inspection was making sure that everybody, all the leaders in the key organisations in the criminal justice system, were informed about what had been decided was a priority and why it was a priority. I think we certainly felt, and I felt talking to some leaders, that they felt a bit out of the room, and they knew it was happening, but maybe how they heard or how they were involved. So there was a previous structure through the Criminal Justice Issues Group. It had some challenges as well in terms of how it was operating, but it's given a space for all those key leaders who will be mindful of what that agreed vision is and the priorities and how are they feeding into it. But that wasn't to do with partnership agreements, that was more to do with really good communication, clearly stated priorities across the criminal justice system, and making sure that key leaders were aware of those.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the issue here is that the Criminal Justice Board is where the strategy, the vision, and they are the decision makers, and from where everything else flows. And they have a series of work strands. From what you have seen in the course of this inspection, were any of those work strands further behind than they should be? Is there any particular organisation that's falling behind, who has a lead on a work strand? Or, I mean, are those progressing as they should? Are there issues within that?
I think you need to ask the department that. That isn't, that level of detail on those 5 agreed priorities weren't something that we drilled down into in detail in the course of this inspection. But I think departmental officials would be well placed to tell you where they are now and what progress has been made against them.
That's fair enough. I think we can follow up on that, because I think it would be important to indicate how they are collaborating with each other in terms of the operational aspects.
I think it's important too, Chair, to say, you know, the nature, while it's called a Criminal Justice Board, it's not a board that you or I would traditionally think of in terms of they have executive making powers across the criminal justice system, because they each have their own leadership responsibilities. Ultimately, yes, the department and the minister funds a vast majority of organisations and individuals that are around that table, but as I said previously, the Public Prosecution Service is funded through the Department of Finance, and sometimes, you know, that isn't really helpful if the Director of Public Prosecutions doesn't have a minister to speak for them on the issues that they can speak for in relation to the workings of the criminal justice system and their resources. I know you've had Stephen here, and I know you've had, you know, good conversations with him about the challenges that he's facing, but there is that sort of scratchiness around, you know, you want and need the Chief Justice to be in the room to inform what's happening from their perspective, but it doesn't in any way impact on their leadership role and what they do in relation to, you know, the judiciary in Northern Ireland. But it isn't a board, and officials I'm sure are better able to explain this than I, but it isn't a board in the formal sense of they have a budget, they have those governance arrangements and executive decision making powers. And I think that sometimes, you know, I wouldn't describe it as fragile, but it is certainly something that you are reliant on leaders doing the right thing by thinking connectedly where they can across the system and saying, right, how can we collectively make sure that this, we've agreed this needs to happen, whether it's better victim and witness care or whether it's about reducing avoidable delay. How are we going to do this through these 5 key priorities that we've identified? How are we going to make this happen, and how will we know it's been successful? But it isn't a board in the traditional sense of what you would expect an executive board to be.
No, I think that we get that. I think that our issue about it is we have an expectation that they will all pull in the same direction because they're all working toward the same end.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that for some heads of function it's difficult. There are organisations that are of different sizes and have different accountability mechanisms. And also, I imagine, as is human nature, there are elements of protectionism, you know, where to give up something or to compromise on something actually, you know, impacts your organisation, and people are reticent to do that and reticent for change. But from our point of view, we want to see the system work better. We want to see it be more efficient, more effective, and to see all of them pull in the same direction rather than duplicate, because, as you had alluded to earlier, David, there was a lot of activity. But whether or not the outcomes were bearing fruit from that was another question. The issue of strategy and the number of strategies, I think, becomes overwhelming. I had raised in the Chamber this week the EPOC programme, probably a couple of years ago now, took a look at the strategies across Northern Ireland and found, with regard to paramilitarism, found that there were at least 89 across the departments, not all departments by the way, at least 89 which had an impact on paramilitarism. None of those strategies were held centrally. The extent of the duplication of that, and even monitoring the outcomes and the achievements and attainments from those strategies, it's almost impossible. You know, so for the financial constraints that there are now within Northern Ireland's budget, a lot of this needs to be stripped away and streamlined, as you have highlighted. And I think the great thing about you coming to this committee now means that we also can keep an eye on this and have conversations about what is the intent, what is the action plan, and how do you propose to follow through, because that's our job. It's our job to see now, you know, that they're putting in the right direction. I have one last question which relates to the corporate plan. So the department has produced a new corporate plan between 2024 and 28, and obviously that was after your inspection. But from what you have seen of that corporate plan, I don't know if you've looked at it, but do you see that anything within that corporate plan addresses some of the issues that you have raised prior to the department taking on this work?
We haven't seen the new Department of Justice corporate plan or business plan for 25-26 yet.
That's fair enough. And just finally then, is there anything that you consider the committee could do that would be helpful to progressing some of this work?
I mean, we really welcome the committee's interest in this work. I think this is the right space. You know, while I have responsibilities as Chief Inspector for deciding what we do follow-up reviews on, I think, you know, the oversight and challenge and support from the committee is essential. What I would say is Northern Ireland is probably better placed than many other jurisdictions because of the size of it and because of that connectedness among organisations, and yes, there is that, you know, because they're a relatively small pool, there is that professional network that people can rely on. I think the difficulty is, as you've said, it becomes, if everything's important, nothing's important. If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And I think what we wanted to point to, and we have pointed to clearly in this report, is that there are opportunities to look across and say, right, if we are truly committed to transformation, and that isn't tinkering with or one single service improvement, if we are truly committed to transformation, to make sure that we try and drive out some of that avoidable delay and, you know, unnecessary use of resources or passing a problem to another organisation, we need to be clear about what it is really important to all of us and what are we going to do to help get there. And I think Northern Ireland, and with the leaders that we have who do and, you know, have a good professional working relationship, we're as well placed now as ever to do it, because we all know resources are tight. They're tight in every organisation, but it's what you've got, what you do well with what you've got.
I think that's absolutely it, and thank you. Does anybody have anything further? No? Jacqui, David, could I thank you very much for your time? It was a really, really useful report, and thank you for providing us with our own kind of summary of it. It was really helpful, and thank you for taking our questions today. We look forward to hearing from you about the other reports, but thank you very much indeed. Members, just then in terms of how you wish to progress this issue, I don't think that this should be where it's left, to be honest. I think we do need, this is an overview of the entire system. It has been made clear to us that everybody's not pulling in the same direction and there are issues around silo working, and I think that it's something that we need to pursue with the department. I think for sure we should be getting in touch to ask the department for a time frame for its action plan. And the engagement that it intends to have with partners on this, and bearing in mind the number of strategies that there are outlined in that in one of those slides. Let me get the right one. Yeah, the one that's on page 20. I mean, you can see there the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus there's another one added in. I mean, I think we need to have some understanding now as to how all those strategies fit together, and I think it would be useful to hear actually from the Permanent Secretary. If we're not going to hear from each of these organisations together about how they're going to work together, then maybe the question needs to go to the Permanent Secretary to find out, okay, well, how does he intend to ensure that all of these bodies now work together and that the department and its bodies are pulling in the one direction with the scant resources that they've got, bearing in mind the limitations on the departmental budget whenever they've only got something like between 2 and 5% to play with. Morris and then Deirdre.
I agree with everything you said there, Chair. I think it's important, but that we as a committee get, even for somebody a written brief, on a very, very regular basis so that we can monitor the progress. That's what I would like to see happening, so that we know exactly where the pitfalls are, who's working with who and who's failing to come up to the mark. So that's what I would like, but it's up to the committee.
I think written briefings at the very least, Maurice, but I think we do need to have regular updates on this. Deirdre?
Yeah, no, Chair, I concur as well, because it is the key strategic recommendation was that would come back. So I would be keen to see what that time scale is, and is it going to form part of the corporate plan, or is it a separate piece? And I would also like to ask them as well, when they are coming, as well as just doing the strategic priorities and the vision, are they going to come with specific outcomes then that they can be measured against as well? So it's not just the strategy bit. And the other bit is how this aligns to the work the department's doing, that all departments are doing, but particularly this one in terms of those 5-year budget plans. You know, so if they're going to set the priorities, how does that align with that work that I think is going to conclude in the autumn? So I'd be keen just for that information. Thanks.
Right, well, tell me this then. We can get that, but do you want to speak to officials about this? I mean, do you want to bring in the Permanent Secretary to have some understanding from him as to where the department is now, what its plans are, what the time frame is, and how all of these strands pull together? Or do you want to just write and see what they say? I mean, my fear is that sometimes it's easier to have a conversation rather than, you know, go back and forward perpetually in letters when we don't always get to the nub of the issues we want. And sometimes the department doesn't necessarily understand what we're asking for, because maybe, you know, do members have views on this? Do you want to go written first and then oral first and then in writing? Right, Doug, you haven't spoken for a while, go ahead, and then I'll bring in Deirdre and Ciara.
Yeah, sure. I think we would be useful to bring in the Permanent Secretary. I mean, if this was an organisation, a single organisation, we'd be putting them in special measures. That's how bad this is. That's how important this issue is. It's really talking about our whole criminal justice system and where it's failing. I think this is as important an issue as anything that we've covered. I would certainly like to speak to the Permanent Secretary and just see how they're moving forward, so I have a degree of confidence, because after that, I don't have confidence.
No, it's one of the most damning reports I've ever read. Deirdre, you wanted in, and then Ciara.
Yeah, no, I would agree, just to get the Permanent Secretary in. I suppose I was just highlighting a few areas that I would like information brought to the meeting. So maybe if we communicate with them in writing around, you know, obviously the report, but some of those additional areas in terms of the 5-year plan and stuff, if we had that up for the meeting, then I think that would be good.
It also would be useful, I think, rather than us faced with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 strategies, if they gave us kind of the key points out of each of those strategies, so that we can look and see and do a bit of a compare and a contrast, so that we can have you know, I don't want to bring the Permanent Secretary in here and be all around the world. I think we need to have focus and afford him the chance to see how he's going to take it forward, but we need to have some understanding of the strategies without having to read 800 pages of strategy first. Ciara?
No, I would concur with the sentiments of bringing the Permanent Secretary in. I would also like to see or hear what's going to be done different, because I wouldn't be as strong as saying it's like a scathing report. I know there's been some aspects of good work done across the system, despite reasons given, whether it was COVID, funding or etc. But I do think we're tinkering, and it is quite urgent. Things are getting worse. So we need to be looking at how we're going to do things differently. I'm a bit concerned regarding the actual board itself, and the Justice Board. Once again, it's a small number of people. There may be good leadership individually within the departments, but how can they work differently? How can they be supported to work differently to make a bigger change and have a more lasting impact, given the wider environment that they're currently operating in? Likewise, just the thing in relation to the Public Prosecution Service and another department as well. I think that's an area that we need to see how they can be working collaboratively. And that collaboration piece with the other departments as well, because that's about working differently. Because you keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results. So maybe that's something else we can address with the Permanent Secretary. I know we're looking internally within Justice, but we really need to also be looking at the cross-departmental working, because I think that's what could really be the trick in making a far bigger difference.
No, I think that's fair. And I think, look, we're not expecting Hugh to come in here and have all the answers. We know that they've had this for 6 months, they're looking at it, they're going to take some time to look at it, and that's fair enough. But I think we need to have some understanding of the direction of travel and what his initial thoughts are. I think that'll be very helpful. So our members agreed then, everybody's happy enough with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next item. Agenda item 5 is the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill Legislative Consent Memorandum, and we're going to have oral evidence from DOJ officials. Members, could I ask you to turn to pages 25 to 206 of your packs, and what do we see? And to the response from the Committee for the Economy, which is at page 21 to 24 of the of your tabled pack. Members, we have with us then DOJ officials Debbie Corry, who's head of Organised Crime Branch, Fiona Scullion, who's head of the Policing Strategy and Engagement Branch, and Matthew Bunting, no relation, Matthew. I'll let you off with that one. A policy advisor, and they're all with us today to give us oral evidence on this bill. Just a reminder of the background to this. The Department laid a memorandum on the 14th of May advising that consent was not being sought, but that the legislative consent memorandum and motion seeking consent was then laid under Standing Order 42A 4A the next day. So that's where we are with this, and obviously we have to have our report produced by the 5th of June. We'll be considering that report, so anything that needs to be raised, this is the day to get it done, because immediately after this we need to take a decision as to where we are with this LCM. So folks, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time to present to us today. We appreciate it. We're sorry that we're running slightly behind time, but you'll understand that was a significant report from Criminal Justice Inspectorate. So I'll hand over to you for opening remarks if you've anything you want to say, and then I'll open the floor to members. Go ahead, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to come along today. We're grateful to both the committee and the clerk for slotting us into your very busy agenda. Committee members will be aware that the department has recently laid 2 separate legislative consent motions, one for the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill, and the other for the Crime and Policing Bill, which I believe we'll come to after this one. So if committee members are content, I'll start just by explaining what the Border Security Bill covers, the measures which engage the legislative consent process, and our anticipated timescales for the legislative consent motion. Committee members were provided with a full written briefing on the 23rd of April, and that's when that first memorandum should have actually been laid and not on the 14th. So there was an administrative error at that point, so it should have been laid then, and then subsequently the memorandum seeking consent laid later. At the outset, I want to acknowledge that we too have found the consent process for this motion challenging. The bill has moved at pace through Westminster, and I do fully appreciate that you'll be frustrated with the timescales as well. So a brief overview of the bill is it was introduced in Westminster on the 30th of January 2025. The overall intention is to create a new framework of enhanced powers and offences to improve UK border security and to strengthen the asylum and immigration process. It also contains various measures that will strengthen the ability of law enforcement agencies and the courts to tackle serious and organised crime. The bill contains a mix of accepted and reserved matters, some which apply or are extended to Northern Ireland and some which are transferred and therefore require consent. So overall, it's been quite complex and an unusual situation. Given the nature and the overall topic of the bill, Home Office initially wrote to the First and Deputy First Ministers, and the Justice Minister wasn't formally engaged. There had been engagement at official level, but not at ministerial level. However, given that the Executive Office then don't have actually any measures which require legislative consent in the bill, the Minister for Justice took a decision to move forward with an LCM for the measures which fall within the Justice remit, recognising that we only have a limited interest in the bill. A further complicating factor is the fact that the Department for the Economy also has a measure in the bill, and the Department has agreed that they can use our LCM as a vehicle to progress that too. So members will have noted that in recent weeks we have moved quickly. That's because we were somewhat concerned that the bill appears to be moving at pace through Westminster, and we did not want to risk not bringing forward a legislative consent motion at this time in case it would gain royal assent before their summer recess. So the Executive considered a paper at their meeting on the 15th of May and agreed that the memorandum could be laid. You will wish to note that a further version of the bill has since been published, and that means that some of the clause numbers have changed. However, in order to reduce the risk of confusion today, we will refer to the clause numbers that were contained in the briefing that we provided to yourselves, and I should emphasise that there have been no amendments to any of the measures for which legislative consent is being sought, so they remain totally unchanged. Turning to the matters which engage the legislative consent process in the bill that relate to justice, there are 3 of those, 2 of which fall to my team and 1 which sits with my colleague in Policing Strategy and Policy Division. The 4th measure is then the responsibility of the Department for the Economy. So the first measure establishes a framework for allowing the Secretary of State for Transport through the Driver Vehicle and Licensing Agency to share trailer registration information with specific government bodies, including police. It authorises the Secretary of State for Transport to supply trailer registration information to the Home Office and designated law enforcement bodies, including UK police forces, HMRC and National Crime Agency. It also sets out how information shared under the legislation can be passed on by recipients like the Home Office or authorised policing personnel, allowing further disclosure to other public functionaries in the UK or abroad for specified purposes relating to policing, criminal investigations, law enforcement purposes and safeguarding national security. The draft legislation ensures that these provisions do not override data protection or investigatory powers laws, and it clarifies the definitions, including who qualifies as an authorised person or an officer, and empowers the Secretary of State to define specific policing purposes through regulations after consulting with relevant stakeholders, and that includes police representatives, Scottish ministers and the Department of Justice. So the second measure, which was also included in the former Criminal Justice Bill, which fell last year just prior to the general election, is to create 2 new criminal offences relating to articles for use in serious crime. That includes possession of a specified article which will be used in connection with a serious offence. It also includes importing, manufacturing, adapting, supplying or offering to supply a specified article where there are reasonable grounds to suspect that that article will be used in any serious offence. The specified articles will be defined in legislation, and they include vehicle concealments for use in transport to move illicit goods, templates for 3D printed firearm components, an encapsulator and tablet presses used in the supply of illegal drugs. A serious offence is defined as one which is specified under Part 2 of Schedule A of the Serious Crime Act 2007. The associated penalty on summary conviction is to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months or a fine to the statutory maximum. On indictment, to imprisonment to a term not exceeding 5 years or a fine or both. The legislation also includes a delegated power to allow the Secretary of State to amend the list of specified items via secondary legislation. There is a requirement to consult the Department before doing so, and any changes must be considered by Parliament. And finally, it amends the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002 by adding those offences to the criminal lifestyle offences at Schedule 5. The third measure extends the offence of a breach of an interim serious crime prevention order. Members will be aware there are wider additions to Serious Crime Prevention Order provisions which are not being extended to Northern Ireland. The extension of this measure to all jurisdictions is to maintain the integrity of the offence and to ensure enforcement, and it's only the offence that actually engages the legislative consent, so the breach. The associated penalty with that offence is again on summary conviction to a term not exceeding 6 months, or to a fine not exceeding the statutory maximum, or on conviction on indictment to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 5 years, or to a fine, or to both. The final measure, as you're aware, then falls to the Department for Economy, and it relates to validation of fees charged in relation to qualifications. I understand that fees have been operational for some time, but it recently came to light that there was a lack of statutory basis for the fees. And I know that committee members are aware that the memorandum had said that the Economy Committee had been provided with a written briefing due to a timing issue that hadn't happened in time, but we know now that that paper has been given to the committee and they received an oral briefing yesterday on the matter. Just by way of information, there are also 2 further measures in the bill which fall into the reserved or accepted space, which will be of interest to the committee. They are amendments to the Serious Crime Prevention Order regime and the introduction of Serious Crime Prevention Orders. These amendments will extend to England and Wales in all cases. However, in Northern Ireland, the changes will relate only to terrorism cases, which isn't a transferred matter, so does not engage the legislative consent process. Finally, there's one further measure that I just want to mention, and it is that Clause 19, powers of search in relation to electronic devices. At present, it is applicable in immigration cases, and it's not therefore a devolved issue. However, there is a regulation-making power which could potentially extend that to appropriate persons. So in theory, that could include PSNI at some point. Now that would be in relation to immigration cases again. Colleagues are working with the Home Office and the Departmental Solicitor's Office on that, just to understand if the legislation should include a consulting clause, so that if it were to refer to PSNI, would that then engage the legislative consent process. At the moment, those discussions don't indicate that that would be necessary, but they're just finalising that. And if there was anything that changed that did invoke legislative consent, then we would come back to the committee on that point. It can't be added to the LCM, which we're brought forward now. That would be subject to something else. And like I said, we don't anticipate that will be the case, but I just wanted to make you aware of that today. Moving on to the projected timescales just for the motion and debate. Subject to no issues arising from the committee's report and the Minister's agreement, we are hoping that the motion could be laid mid-June and the debate hopefully then before summer recess. And that, I think, is probably everything I have for now. So happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything they want to ask? Deirdre?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for the update. And I would be keen then on the last point that you raised there, just in terms of that additional regulating making power. If we could just be kept up to date on that, I think that would be good. And keen to see. The other bit then around, it's in the letter that the department had sent that's in our committee pack, just in terms of the LCM aspects of the bill and Article 2, you know, that there was satisfaction from the British government's kind of human rights screening of this, that it doesn't contravene with Article 2 too much, but I'm just saying in any local engagements with the Human Rights Commission here, was there anything different pertaining to Clause 32 and stuff?
Okay,
I'm trying to find, hold on. So sorry, it was in pertaining to clauses 30 to 33. So just the human rights from the UK government, their memorandum said that their assessment shows that it was proportionate in terms of Article 2. So I'm just checking to see what had the Human Rights Commission here a different view, or
Yeah, that's right, it's my clause. So I'm not sure if you've had sight of the Commission's advice, but they did provide an assessment in terms of clauses 30 to 33, and they did recommend that we sought an expanded human rights memorandum from the Home Office, which we did, and the Home Office did explore that, and they came back to say that they have conducted their own Article 2 analysis and are content that there are no issues or reduction in rights in relation to Article 2. So I have shared that feedback from the Home Office with the Commission, and they have nothing further to add at this stage. However, they will be soon publishing advice on the bill as a whole, and that's imminently. So.
Could that also be flagged with ourselves then, pertaining to this issue, if they do raise anything in that? And I suppose, is there any Windsor framework considerations then around these issues that they've raised? No, or?
No, it was just that. It was just, well, they acknowledged that the Human Rights Memorandum that was published, they just wanted an expanded Human Rights Memorandum to say that the Article 2 rights had been taken into consideration in these clauses. But as I say, the Home Office were content that they'd carried out their own human rights assessment and their own Article 2 analysis, and that there was no issues or diminution of rights.
Members, before we just kind of get into some detail, could I backtrack a wee second, just in terms of the generalities here? So essentially, Debbie, in the first motion that was laid, or the first letter that was laid, there was an indication that you wanted to consult further with partners, and that included the committee, the executive,
Yes.
the Human Rights Commission, and so on. And then you're saying there was an administrative error, and so the actual thing was laid and started the clock the next day, which has us all in a bit of a sweat. That's fine. So we are where we are. But you're due to, from the papers that we had, you were due to receive a report from the Human Rights Commission in a few weeks' time. Is that right? So you haven't received that full report. You've had their initial assessment,
yes, that's right.
but you haven't actually had their full report in the bill yet. Is that right?
The full report would be the report that they would be publishing as part of the overall process of the bill, that they would generally report in all scrutiny cases.
Right. So could I ask, whenever, just so that we're clear on the background now, whenever you had indicated that you wanted a bit of time, not massive amounts of time, but additional time to consult with other people.
Yes.
What were you envisaging there, and was it the intention to lay this prior to receipt of Human Rights Commission's full report?
Normally you wouldn't lay a memorandum until you were at the point of receiving consent. However, given that the initial correspondence had gone to First and Deputy First Minister and not come to the Home Office, we felt it was important to make sure that everyone was aware that the bill had been introduced and it was running in Westminster, and that the department did have an interest and there were measures in it for which we would be considering consent. So that was the reason that we reached out to colleagues in TEO to find out what would the process be, and the advice that we got was to lay the general memorandum at that point. The timing was unfortunate. We had written to the executive previously in relation to the bill, and we wrote to the committee then on the 23rd of April. Since that time, we then were working through with operational partners as to were there other measures that we needed to take things into account of. So in relation to the likes of serious crime prevention orders, etc., there were a few issues that we wanted to talk through with them. We also, during that time, we had initially engaged with the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission as soon as the bill was published, and they provided us with our initial report. We have worked through their comments, so we have looked at the UK government memorandum as well, alongside the comments from Human Rights Commission. We have kept in touch with Human Rights Commission as well, and we know that their report, which would be standard in relation to any bill that's brought forward by UK government, should be published, we believe, relatively shortly. In addition, where there were issues, I think you've been engaging separately on those, Fiona. On our side, we had been looking at the comments that came back, so in relation to the articles for youth and serious crime, and working through that with Home Office to make sure, you know, that any comments that they had raised had been considered in a Northern Ireland context. So very much considering, you know, the advice that had been provided and working through that.
I suppose I was just trying to understand, you know, you indicated you need a bit of time to consult further.
Yes.
You know, did you get it? What
Yes.
happens now? You know, are you going to get all that you need now that the clock has started?
Yeah, I think we're at the point now where we have considered the points that have been raised. We have worked through them, and yeah, we're content to move forward.
That's
Okay.
I want to check that, and that's why I kind of
Yep.
want to step back before we get into if people have specific issues with specific clauses. Does anybody have anything that they want to flag up here? Deirdre?
Sorry, it was just to go back on that then in terms of just your letter. It was the 22nd of May dated. It's on paragraph, it's point 19 in the letter. In our text, it's on page 37, just for members. But obviously, I mean, it reiterates just what you said there in terms of the British government's human rights memorandum said that they're content that it's proportionate. But it also says in terms of determining the compatibility with Article 2, that will also depend on an assessment of the forthcoming regulations to be made under Clause 32, Section 8, and an understanding of how disclosures are conducted in practice. So will the department get sight, and will those regulations come back to the Assembly under those elements in terms of any future regulations? And again, you know, just that they're going to be screened in terms of human rights and compatibility with Article 2. So just a wee bit of clarity on that, please.
Yeah, it's my understanding that it's the Secretary of State for Transport who has the power to specify, to make regulations. However, the Department of Justice will be consulted, but there, as far as I'm aware, there won't be local scrutiny. They'll be subject to scrutiny in Parliament, but not local scrutiny. But certainly, I mean, those regulations are going to specify, you know, the exact purposes related to policing for which the Secretary of State may supply trailer registration data, and also and define the specific policing purposes for which it could be disclosed as well. So we will expect certainly to be consulted, and obviously then to consult with the Human Rights Commission as well.
Yeah, so you will do that though,
Yes.
locally, is what I'm trying to get clarity.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I suppose, Chair, sorry, it's just to put on the record. I mean, it's probably the broader piece of this bill, and it's going to be the same as the next one in terms of the reserved powers. You know, I would have concerns of the draconian nature of part of this legislation, and again, just to highlight the fact that the Assembly has no say in those elements. So I just want that put on the record and to be noted. Thank you.
Deirdre, Ciara?
Just one question, and it's in relation to your paper on the 23rd of April, where the Minister had indicated she wouldn't extend some of the provisions under the serious crime prevention orders and this interim serious crime prevention orders, and you want to continue to work in partnership with partners and take time to review it, etc. Just from your own perspective, what impact would that potentially have here? Will it leave a gap? And then likewise, what would be the necessary steps once you have collaborated and made decisions on it in relation to bringing forward it at a later date, and how would that happen?
Okay, so whilst the amendments to serious crime prevention orders had been included in the former criminal justice bill, so there had been some policy work and engagement at that point. However, the introduction of the interim serious crime prevention orders was something totally new, and it had moved at pace. So that was one of the reasons that we wanted to take time to sort of scope through to make sure that there wasn't going to be any issues with introducing those in Northern Ireland. We did reach out to law enforcement colleagues as well, and they would be of a view that the numbers are very low in relation to these cases. And at present, they don't envisage that there would be a significant gap if we weren't to have those in place in Northern Ireland. What we would like to do is take time to review the existing regime, because what some colleagues have told us is that there is an inconsistency sometimes in approach and those being enforced. So we would like to look at the existing regime to see if it is completely fit for purpose, if we need to amend it slightly. And we do think there are good policy intentions in this. You know, it's something that we would just like to do in a wee bit slower time, just to make sure that we're getting it right for Northern Ireland. So subject capacity within the branch, we would like to take forward a piece of scoping work just to look at exactly what the position is at the minute, how the changes maybe are going to work in England and Wales, take learning from there, and then probably bring forward some local legislation through the Assembly itself, so that it, you know, it would be subject to scrutiny as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. What way do you intend to do that, Debbie?
It would have to be through local legislation. So again, it would have to be in the next mandate, because there wouldn't be a.
So you're looking at primary? You're looking at regs? Or?
Primary legislation. Yes. Sorry.
Okay. Does anybody have anything further? No. Could I just check? I'm not sure that I've fully got my head around the business of the SCPOs and interim SCPOs. So I understand that the interim only applies here, but so essentially then you're looking at the potential for these to be brought, I mean, this just relates to terrorism, but you're looking at the potential for it to be brought in more generally. Yeah,
there are serious crime prevention orders in Northern Ireland at the minute, so that the changes being brought forward in England and Wales would amend their system.
Okay.
And we could have asked for that to be extended possibly to Northern Ireland. However, we need to look at it in a Northern Ireland context to make sure they're fit for purpose, and that's what we want to do, is to carry out that policy development, that scope and work, to make sure that whatever we do put in place and whatever amendments we do bring forward very much reflect the position here, and work with our criminal justice partners and with the court system here as well, just so that to make sure it's a really good fit.
Okay. And what if somebody comes here and is in breach? What happens then?
Of an interim serious crime prevention order, that's what that second measure that we're asking for consent for is about. So we're asking for, so if somebody in England and Wales is subject to an interim order and they come to Northern Ireland and breach that, that would still be an offence. So that's what the legislative consent motion would cover, the actual offence of a breach as such.
Okay. And if they had just a normal SCPO and they are in breach here, we've already got them, so it's all covered
that's
already
in legislation.
Right. Okay. So that's great.
The position that we're taking is very similar to the position in Scotland as well. They've adopted the same position as we have, so it won't be extended there either at this point in time.
Okay. Anybody have anything further? No. There you are. It wasn't as bad maybe as you thought it might have been. Folks, thank you very much. I appreciate that some of you are coming back to the table, but you might want us just to have a different seat for a moment or two until we do our deliberations now, and then we'll call you back if that's all right. But thank you very much for that. Members, just a reminder that at last week's meeting we agreed to seek the views of the Committee for the Economy on the provisions relating to the validation of fees charged in relation to qualifications, and that's the responsibility of the Economy Minister. The Economy Committee has indicated in its response, which is at pages 21 to 24 of the table pack, that it is prepared to support the request for legislative consent. Under Standing Order 42A7, a committee has 15 working days from the date of referral to consider and report on an LCM, and the memorandum was laid on the 15th of May, so the committee report must be completed by the 5th of June. In order to enable the report on the LCM to be prepared for consideration and agreement at our meeting, we need to consider our position now and make decisions today. So could I ask whether or not you're content with the proposal to extend the provisions dealing with, and I'm going to list them just so that everybody's clear before I put the question. So the provisions are going to deal with the sharing of information, this is all as Debbie has outlined, offences relating to articles for use in serious crime, breach of an interim serious crime prevention order in non-terrorist cases, and validation of fees charged in relation to qualifications to Northern Ireland by way of an LCM or any further information. You don't require any further information, no, I'll take that out. So, are members content with the proposal? Yes?
Yep.
Right.
Chair.
Yes, who's that, Doug?
Sorry, Chair. Justin McAnulty, Chair.
Yes, Justin, sorry.
Chair, has the Executive Office reported back in terms of what's their position, saying they were contacted first on this LCM?
Yes, they said they were content for it to be laid.
Okay. And has that information been provided to us in terms of how they consulted fully with that?
What was the last bit? Has information been provided to us with how they were consulted? What was the next bit?
In terms of how they fed back to that in that entirety of their response? Is that in our pack? Just not sure I saw that.
Well, I think the reason that it went to TEO was to establish whether or not it didn't go to TEO. It went to the entire executive to determine. The department took it to the entire executive to determine whether or not they were content for the LCM to be laid. And the executive indicated that yes, they were. So erroneously, it was laid the next day, but that had not been the original intention. I'm not sure if that covers your question. Or do you want the officials? Do you want the officials to answer? Debbie, could you maybe step forward and give us a?
The initial correspondence had gone to TEO. However, the measures in the bill which require legislative consent all sit with Justice and Department for Economy. So as such, we then took a full paper to the executive where they were asked to all agree that the legislative consent motion and memorandum could be laid, and that happened on the 15th of May at the executive meeting. Does that give you enough?
Justin, are you content with that, or does that answer your query?
I'm just not sure. Why did they go to the executive first as opposed to going to Justice?
I think initially the initial correspondence probably went to TEO given the overall nature of the bill. So given that it's sort of asylum and immigration, that's not a justice matter. So the Home Office Minister wrote directly to First and Deputy First Minister. And I do believe that has happened in other instances as well in relation to UK government. That's why they wrote directly there. However, given that TEO don't have any measures in the bill that require legislative consent, it was then for the Justice Minister to bring forward the legislative consent motion for the measures which fall within her remit. At the same time, the Economy Minister could have brought forward a second LCM or a separate LCM for her measure, but during consultation with officials, and it was agreed at ministerial level as well, that due to efficiency within the Assembly and that it would be beneficial just to have one joint LCM. So the measures that are in it then go to the executive as a whole, and it's the entire executive who then decide whether or not we can go forward and lay that memorandum. So I think that's why the correspondence initially probably went to TEO. However, our minister was the minister who had the majority of measures which required consent.
So essentially, Justin, it was the government made a mistake and sent it to the wrong place.
Okay. Well, here, thankfully, there's still there the folks who give the evidence. In terms of the clause 43 and the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission issues raised, just tell me what your views are on reversing the evidential burden of proof and what that means for this LCM.
Just give me a wee minute because I've just moved my briefing back around a wee bit.
Sorry to go back.
No, you're okay. Just a wee minute if you don't mind. Oh, I'm in the wrong bill now. Okay.
Clause 43.
Yep. So that's in relation to the articles for use in serious crime. So yes, Human Rights Commission had mentioned that in their initial correspondence to us. So we had gone back and had looked at the reverse evidential burden. Obviously, we were very mindful of the serious nature of the crimes that this clause relates to. So it's offences in relation to drug trafficking, violent offences, etc. So if a defendant wants to rely on such a defence, they must prove credible and reliable evidence to support that claim. And then the burden would shift back on the prosecution to be able to prove that. So some of the considerations that we took into consideration when we were looking at the use of the reversal burden was that the articles in question would rarely be used in everyday lawful business. So an encapsulator, a pill press, they're not items that everybody would have. Their primary purpose is associated with criminal activity, and the burden placed on the defendant is limited and proportionate, so it doesn't actually require them to prove their innocence. They only have to provide a plausible explanation, and then, as I said, it would revert on to the prosecution in order to prove, the burden of proof. We're also aware that it's not a novel approach. It's also in the Terrorism Act as well. So overall, we were compliant, overall, we considered that it was proportionate in relation to these offences. Does that help?
Okay, Justin.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right, so I'm going to put the question again, which is, are members content with the proposal? Yes?
Yes, content, yeah.
Great, thank you. On that basis then, members, a draft report is going to be prepared for consideration by the committee on the 5th of June. And just a note on that, the pack is going to be issued a day later to afford the officials time to draft that report. So you'll not get your pack on Monday, you'll get it on Tuesday. Okay? But next week we've got the round table, so the business will be very brief. Okay, that's that one done. We'll move on to agenda item 6, and I would invite, we've already got Debbie, who is just a reminder, Debbie's the head of organised crime. Now I'd invite Lorraine Ferguson-Coote, who's the head of criminal policy unit. Hi Lorraine, welcome back. And Fiona, head of policing strategy and engagement. Fiona, long time no see. Right, that's great. We're going to look at agenda item 6, and that is the Crime and Policing Bill, LCM. And we're going to again have oral evidence from the department. Members, if you would turn to page 207 of your meeting pack and page 26 to 30 of the tabled papers. We've considered this proposal for the LCM provisions in the Crime Policing Bill over a number of meetings. And at last week's meeting, we agreed to seek further information from the department on whether the requirement to notify could act as a deterrent. This is about the registered sex offenders, details of the categories of offender and whether they relate to offence or risk, and if all categories of offenders will be treated the same after 15 years, and the department's response is included at pages 26 to 30 of your table papers. We also asked the PSNI for clarification of whether they would inform a partner of a registered sex offender who had been discharged from notification requirements that they had previously been on the register. We haven't yet received a response from the PSNI, but as soon as we do, that will be circulated, although it puts us in some difficulty, I think. I've already introduced the officials to you. They're here to again respond if we've got any queries so that we can make a determination as to where we are on this LCM. So folks, you're very welcome. Thank you very much. I don't know whether you've got any opening remarks you wish to make or whether you want to go straight to questions or
I'm happy to do a brief overview if that's helpful. It is brief, or go straight to questions, whichever the committee would find more helpful.
That's fair enough, David. Would members be content to hear a brief overview, or do you want to go straight to questions? Happy with an overview? Yes?
Yep.
Agreed. You're up, Debbie.
Thank you. So I will keep this brief, you'll be glad to hear. So the bill is currently at report stage in the Commons. You will wish to note that, as with the earlier bill, there has now been a revised version of the Crime and Policing Bill has just been published. Again, we have checked the bill and there are no substantive amendments to any of the measures which require legislative consent. So in terms of the legislative consent motion for this bill, again, at the meeting on the 15th of May, a paper was considered by the executive. They agreed that the memorandum could be laid, and it was laid the next day. So just moving very quickly on to the measures that are included in the legislative consent motion. We had initially proposed to bring forward 11. However, this has now been reduced to 10, and that's because there was one measure which is still subject to ongoing policy development, and that was clause 95, which is about expanding the lawful use of purposes that the police can use the GB DVLA driver licence database. And colleagues will write and provide the committee with an update on that once it is available. But just to be very clear today, that measure is not included in the current request for the legislative consent motion. So the 10 measures that the Minister is seeking legislative consent for are a new offence of cuckooing. Number 2, provision to extend the scope of the current offence of possession of a paedophile manual. Number 3, provisions relating to the management of sex offenders which aim to strengthen and streamline the current sex offender notification requirements. Number 4 is a new offence of spiking. Number 6, a new offence of encouraging or assisting self-harm. Number 7, offences relating to electronic devices for use in vehicle theft. 7 is about reforming the existing confiscation regime for proceeds of crime under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002. Number 8 is about the introduction of cost protections relating to proceeds of crime in civil proceedings. 9 is about a regulation making power in relation to implementation of international law enforcement information sharing agreements. And 10 is about criminal liability, where a senior manager commits an offence whilst acting in the scope of their actual or apparent authority for all crimes. So again, we hope that, subject to a satisfactory report from the committee and with the agreement of the Justice Minister, that the legislative consent motion could be laid by mid-June and the debate held before the summer recess. The committee will be aware that there will be at least one further request for a legislative consent motion in relation to this bill. That will also include one additional measure which falls to the Department of Health, which will come forward at the request of the Health Minister. We engage that the committee will receive a further written paper on that late June or early in September. But the measures that we're seeking for consent for today are very clearly those that I've already outlined. The indicative timings for this bill is that it's scheduled to receive royal assent towards the end of the year. So I hope that's been helpful, but happy to take questions.
That's great, Debbie. Thank you very much. Deirdre.
Yeah, again, thanks very much for the update. And I was actually going to ask you in terms of a second LCM. So there'll be no second LCM, as was highlighted before, coming from Justice. It'll be Health. No, sorry. There will be a second LCM coming from Justice, and it will include the health measure as well. Okay. So Justice will bring that forward, yes. So we'll have sight of that then? You will indeed, okay. Yes. Okay, and will it go to Health at the same time? There'll be dual processes, is it? Or will it just... I believe so. I believe policy colleagues in the Department of Health have written to their committee about the measure. They've also obviously engaged with their minister, and he has written to our minister to seek her agreement to bring it forward. That will also be very clearly laid out in any future papers, just so that there's clarity around where responsibility lies. What is the measure? Sorry, you know what the measure is now that will be coming forward, just so, or could we get a copy of that letter that was corresponded with the Health Committee, or? We'll be including information on the measure with the paper that's due to come in and around the end of June, if you're content with that. It is actually, I believe, to do with the removal of supervision exemption from the definition of regulated activity. So I think it's quite a specific measure, but we will provide information on that in the written paper that comes to the committee in due course.
Like a second LCM is essentially like starting again. You know, we'll need to consider those,
exactly,
all those individual measures.
And it's just so I'm aware of what's coming down the line. And I suppose you don't anticipate at this point any further LCMs at this point in time. It's hard to know. At this point, we envisage that there will be 7 measures, including that Department of Health one, that will require
legislative consent. Now, it will depend when Home Office table those amendments as to whether or not they would come together in one LCM or whether they would need to be grouped in separate LCMs. There are also, I think, 2 or 3 policy areas where officials are having very early conversations to see if there are additional measures that could be extended to Northern Ireland, but it will very much depend on when the measures are added to the bill by amendment, as to how they would be grouped going forward.
Okay, no, appreciate that, thank you. And the other wee bit was just around, it's pertaining to your letter, dated, it was just the letter, it was in our addendum pack dated the 20th of May. So just the department response, and it was clarification on categories in terms of, it was around sex offences and stuff. And it talked about, what is it, an own motion review that would be triggered after 15 years. I'm just wondering what the criteria is for triggering that and who triggers it.
Well,
and I might not need all that today, but just if you can send that clarification,
yeah.
just in terms of, because I know the Human Rights Commission had raised points pertaining to this area. So I would be keen just to see what the process is for triggering it at that 15-year point. Is it the police? And again, what's the criteria? Or is it the individual? Or so just a bit more clarity would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That would be my domain. There is already an ability, a review scheme, review and discharge scheme, which operates under the Sexual Offences Act 2003, and that came about as a consequence of a UK Supreme Court ruling on indefinite notification periods, which breached Article 8. ECHR, and the remedial action taken was to legislate, and all of the UK jurisdictions did that at a similar time so that there's consistency across the board in terms of management of sex offenders. So what that does, and it has been operating since 2013, that allows a sex offender who is subject to indefinite notification, which indefinite notification would apply to those sex offenders who are convicted otherwise of a specified offence for a period of 30 months or more, so that's about 2.5 years or more. And what would happen then at the 15-year point from their initial notification to the police for an adult, and 8 years for a juvenile, if they were juvenile at the time they made their initial notification, they would be eligible then to apply to the police to review that period. The police would then consult with the other Public Protection Agency colleagues in terms of the risk, and assess the other pieces of information intelligence that they have as part of the local risk assessment processes that are ongoing, and they'll assess whether that person qualifies if they're low risk, but they'll only look at category 1, the low risk offenders, and that's the current process. So if they consider there is a low risk, then they will discharge and they will notify that person, but they can refuse that. And at the moment, the police have a challenge in the High Court where sex offender is challenging the application scheme, their application to come off when they're saying, no, there's a risk. So they do take this, on a case-by-case basis. So what the own motion review scheme will do, this provision will bolster the existing scheme. It's going to run in parallel. The framework is almost identical. The person can appeal, obviously, and that's where we're into the High Court for the application scheme. So, and the Human Rights Commission did have a query as to whether or not the person could still apply, and they can, because this is going to run in parallel. So what it does is it was to enhance the effectiveness of resourcing within police management of sex offenders. And it was the impetus of that was around Mick Creedon. He was a former assistant constable in Derbyshire, and he carried out a review in England and Wales with some consultation in the other UK jurisdictions, the police forces. So what he found was that there were people who weren't applying, and simply because they just couldn't be bothered with an application process, and so these people were still sitting. They were low risk and they were still sitting, and the police had to go through the motions in risk management. And with police resources being as valuable as they are in that area particularly, it didn't free up the police time. So whenever we consulted police on this initially, on this proposal, they were very welcoming of it, as were the other public protection agencies, because this will allow them to focus more on the higher risk categories. And they only ever discharge someone if there is no longer that, sexual harm risk associated. So this will be an ability for police to do it of their own motion as opposed to an application, and it will be triggered by the same period, the 15 years for an adult, 8 years for a juvenile, and at that point they'll look at the Category 1 offender, offender risk management.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
just so I'm clear in my own head, so at the moment, I mean, I can get it to Category 1 offenders so at the moment then they can apply at the 15-year point, the individual.
Yes.
But the changes here then will allow, there'll be like an automatic triggering then by the police at the 15-year point or the 8-year point.
Yes, and that'll allow police to do it. Yeah, of their motions, it says on the tin, as I always say. But yes, and it won't replace it.
I know, so that I know they would still need to do the risk assessment, but I suppose
Yes.
just the triggering for that review. It's the 15 years, and will that be like a IT system then that kind of looks at that 15-year point?
Sorry, yes, they have a dedicated case management system that operates, and there are only dedicated officers in the public protection team that will have access to that system, and they'll be very aware of those the various categories. They'll know who's on the books, so to speak, and they've already identified people who they could assess once this legislation comes in. They've already been sort of looking at that, but yeah, they consider this as a valuable mechanism.
But it's an automatic triggering, then once it's at the 15 years and the 8 years, and once if you're a Category 1, that's an automatic. Okay, that's all I needed. Sorry, it was just that clarity. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, just to say, sorry, Joanne, again, more broadly with this LCM as the last, again, it's just noted on the record, just obviously, a concern in terms of, again, some of the reserved matters and the draconian nature of the legislation as well, not pertaining obviously to the LCM matters. It's more the broader piece, so I just want, again, that noted on the record. Thank you.
Connie?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming in today. And I think I just wanted, if you could outline for us the implications if this LCM wasn't passed and wasn't taken forward, and the implications we would have if we then became out of step with other jurisdictions on this.
Well, if I could start certainly on the sex offender side, there would be implications because it would pose a gap. And as I've said to committee before, sex offenders do travel across the jurisdictions. And they could be very attracted to a jurisdiction that maybe doesn't have the same safeguards as another. We've worked over the years to ensure through primary and secondary legislation, sex offender notification requirements, otherwise known as the Sex Offender Register, have been in some form since 1997 in legislation, and we've always sought to strengthen it, and in consultation with the other UK jurisdictions. So certainly there would be a void for us. We would be out of step in that important area. And it's not where we would want to be if that was unfortunately the case, if we didn't have the LCM in this area, because ensuring consistency and protections around the UK public protection is key, really. So can only speak certainly from those, and also there's the possession of paedophile manual, which I'm responsible for as well. And what that seeks to do is close a gap in law at the moment where the advice and guidance that these paedophiles set out with their manuals does not include pseudo images. So this will ensure that we're up to speed with that, and that there's no safe place for those people that use those images to guide and advise fellow paedophiles, if that's want of a better term.
I think too, from an organised crime perspective, it's very important to maintain parity, but also to make sure that Northern Ireland isn't left without protection, so that specifically, electronic devices for use in vehicle theft and that people don't come to Northern Ireland then to perpetrate specific crimes. Also for the likes of spiking and other offences that are coming through. Given the constraints on the current legislative mandate in the Assembly, it would be difficult for us to find a suitable vehicle to include some of these measures in. So it could be some time before we were able to catch up. So very much a case of, being able to keep Northern Ireland on a par with other jurisdictions and to have those safeguards in place.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Connie, thank you. Ciara.
Just for my own information, could you simplify the process in relation to the difference between Category 1 sexual offences and the changes that are going to be implemented in comparison to Category 2, Category 3? So it's just clear in my head exactly who's going to be assessed from a low risk perspective in relation to this legislation.
The low risk and certainly it's not that an operational side, for the police. They do have 3 categories, 1 to 3, 1 being the lowest, medium, then being 2, and then the high risk. And they do look at it in terms, obviously, of the risk that they pose, but also the frequency of someone and the gravity of their offence, etc. So those people who are in the higher risk are going to be those that have carried out significant and more serious sexual offending. I don't have the definitions of those. I could actually
search them there now, just to be clear in my head of exactly the Category 1.
There's stuff has been sent through. There's stuff in the pack. I think that gives you some indication.
Yeah. So the Category 1 would be the lowest, and that's the one they'd be looking to review and discharge. They're not going to look at other categories because that wouldn't be appropriate. And they're fed information on a routine basis. The police in conjunction with the Public Protection Agency, so they're well aware of these people and the risk they pose. So they won't be doing that in terms of discharge if someone still is a risk of sexual harm.
Fine, thank you.
Okay, Ciara, thank you. I just have 2 questions, ladies, if I may. I understand that you're in discussions with the police about notification to people's partners. The way there's that business of, a partner or somebody can request if there's an issue there, and whether or not somebody who requests information will be informed if somebody is no longer required to notify.
So if they're technically considered not a risk and off the notification requirements, and is this an intimate partner, Chair? Someone who's in a relationship?
Well, I don't know. It's just, I suppose I'm trying to establish, okay, well, if somebody gets in touch and says, is there anything I need to be worried about here? The way you can with domestic violence and so on. If somebody no longer has to notify, is that still going to be possible? Now, we're waiting to hear from the PSNI on this, and we understand you're in conversations. But the thing that concerns me about this is some of this stuff already exists, and yet nobody seems to be clear about what will happen.
Yeah, well, certainly if there's risk there under the current PPANI, and I suspect even if someone has come off that register and somebody has a concern, disclosure can be made under the PPANI guidance if there's, in order to safeguard children and vulnerable adults, and that's what the police are saying. So they would look at that on an individual basis and the circumstances around that. There is, of course, as you mentioned, the Domestic Violence and Abuse Disclosure Scheme, and they have said that quite often domestic and sexual violence can be intertwined, and where there is a violent sexual offence, that information could be accessible through that particular scheme. And then we have the Child Protection Disclosure Scheme, which can provide information from those who have been child sex offenders, if someone has concerns, particularly about someone being in contact with a child, for example. So there are mechanisms there, but it would have to be considered on a case-by-case basis, is what I understand.
Okay.
So it's...
That's fair enough, Lorraine, but I think I would want some reassurance that, yes, I get that there are other mechanisms,
yes,
but I want to know about this one specifically, and I want to understand that just because somebody no longer needs to notify because of these offences, that if somebody if a person makes a request about whether or not they're at risk or their children are at risk or whatever, that they'll be
They
told?
can through the child protection disclosure arrangements, and that
But what
would be
about
the children themselves.
I mean-
Only if it's posed with the domestic violence abuse would only be within that context. If there's a new risk, of concern of a new risk, that will be looked at. And if that risk is substantiated, then police can move in terms of a sexual offences prevention order, for example. That's something, but that's more a mechanism in dealing with a risk.
I presume that
Granted.
if you got it, but that's my whole point. If you
Yeah.
reach that point, you shouldn't have been taken off the notification. You shouldn't have been taken off the register anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do. But, I mean, police will be able to answer that, Chair, but just from certainly the information I'm getting from police is they'll be looking at this very critically and with other partners. So they won't make, it'll be a very serious matter to take someone off and discharge them, unless if there's a significant risk there or any other risk.
This is what I don't get, Lorraine.
Yeah.
So they've already been doing this, but not by request or whatever way it's working. They've already been doing this anyway.
Yes.
The procedures are in place.
Yes, an
so why
application.
can't they tell me? I don't understand.
Tell you that someone has...
Whether they're going to notify or not. Do you know what I mean? Whether they're going to disclose or not.
Disclose the information or
Yeah.
the information to a partner.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, police will be able to answer that. I mean, they'll take all the information into account. I'm just not terribly sure of the exact...
Am I not explaining it well?
No, sorry.
Right. So there are already mechanisms for people to be deregistered,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Those exist.
Yes.
This is a proposal to slightly change that to afford people a chance to be taken off a different way, automatically after a time period.
Yes.
Bearing in mind, there are already processes to take somebody off the register. I don't understand why disclosure would change. So what I'm asking is, if a new partner contacts the police and says, does my partner have a history of, is my partner a risk to me? Because presumably, because you've indicated there's another mechanism for children, are the police going to disclose that they were previously on the sex offenders register? Now, I don't understand why they can't answer it in relation to this, whenever they've already had a similar procedure that continues to run. This is just because now it's going to be automatically flagged, so I don't understand why they can't answer that question straight off the bat.
Yes, well, the same would apply, because these are they're very similar schemes, only one's an application and one's done of its own motion.
Exactly.
There is ability to disclose, but that will be considered on a case-by-case basis. And that's what the police advised me, that's their ability to do for both schemes. So beyond that, there's no dedicated scheme, there's no scheme like the domestic violence disclosure scheme or anything beyond the child protection disclosure arrangements. There's no dedicated scheme, but disclosures can be made where it's considered necessary, and it'll be considered on an individual basis. Now, there are, sex offenders, as part of their licence requirements, etc., they have to disclose to partners. That's all part of licence, requirements, that they have to be upfront and say, look, I was convicted of these offences, and I know that's a stipulation, and it's something that they must do whenever they are. There's certain offenders have to do this, but at this stage, after 15 years, I'm not quite sure.
So the licences and conditions around that change at the point at which you're no longer on the register?
They run in parallel initially, but your licence conditions can be for a certain period, but your notification requirements may be longer.
Okay.
So it's not, some of them will fall out of kilter with that. So yes, there is an ability, already there. There's a mechanism through licence requirements. Notification requirements are different. They're about notifying to the police, so they can keep a track on that individual. But the prevention orders, which often go hand in hand with notification requirements, the sexual offences prevention order, for example, that contains individual tailored prohibitions and requirements, you know, which are very specific to their, you know, their needs in terms of how they manage those individuals.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a sense of the safeguards.
I know it's a bit of a. I wasn't quite sure what you were coming at.
No,
But
I just want to understand the safeguards and whether and which of those safeguards potentially drop away as a result of denotification, because I think that would be of concern to us and wider society. And I appreciate Category 1 is Category 1, and it's not always grey, or it's not always black and white. Sometimes we know that there are grey issues, and there are issues of consent and age, you know, where it's just something straightforward with teenagers, but it's not always.
I know, and yeah, I do take your point. But yeah, I mean, there are mechanisms there. There's never, with sex offenders, and the police will say, there's never no risk. It's low risk. And that's what we have to remember with these type of offenders.
That's fine. We'll see what the police say. I don't think it's going to stop us kind of going forward or otherwise, but I think I will want to know what the police have to say around that. Just finally, you had indicated that the driving licences element had been removed because you were there was ongoing policy development. Could you tell us what you're looking at there and what's happening in that regard?
That doesn't sit within my policy remit, but as far as I'm aware, there were some concerns just had been raised, and policy colleagues wanted some time to tease that out with Home Office. So I don't know if you can...
Yes, so we have basically sought an amendment so that the Department of Justice can commence the power, and we are currently waiting on a response from the Home Office. So the Minister wrote at some point in March, and we know the Home Office are currently considering that and just how the policy would work in lines with the legal requirements. So, and as soon as we get that official response, we're going to brief the Minister, and then we'll contact the committee as soon as possible after that.
Okay, so that's great, Fiona, thank you. All right, we'll work on that basis, then we'll hear from you in due course when you're a bit further down the line. Okay, thank you. Right, members, does anybody have anything further for our officials? No? Okay. Ladies, thank you very much indeed. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for the time today that you've given to us, and thank you for answering all our questions. Thank you. So members, just a reminder again that under Standing Order 42A7, the committee has 15 working days from the date of referral to consider and report on an LCM, and that memorandum was laid on the 16th of May. So we have to report by the 9th of June. Therefore, the report's going to need to be considered at the committee meeting of the 5th of June. So Debbie read the full list of what's included in the provisions. You don't need me to read those again, do you? They'll be recorded in the minutes. Are you content, or do you need me to read them? No, everybody's good. Thank you. So are you... Excuse me just a second. Are you content with the proposal to extend the provisions by way of legislative consent motion? Or do you require anything further now?
I'm content.
I'm content too. Content?
Yep.
Yep. Thank you. On that basis then, members, the draft report is going to be prepared for consideration by the committee at our meeting on the 5th of June. Agenda item 7 is Justice Bill written papers. Item 7.1 refers to requests for further information. You'll see at page 308 of your pack. That's where the relevant papers can be found. The committee team has collated a list of the committee's requests for information on the Justice Bill to date and the responses received thus far. Are you content to note that? Obviously that's updated weekly. Thank you. Agenda item 8 is Statutory Rule 2025-80, the Electronic Monitoring Requirements Responsible Office Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2025. You'll find that at page 332. The rule is going to prescribe the organisations that are authorised to provide electronic monitoring services in Northern Ireland, and we sought further information from the Department on a number of matters on this, and after receiving oral evidence from departmental officials on the 27th of February 2025, we agreed that we were content with the proposal for this rule. The Department has confirmed there have been no changes to the policy content since the SL1 was considered by the committee. However, the commencement date has been moved back to support the transition and mobilisation of the new electronic monitoring service. Just to advise, the examiner, as see Deirdre there, I'll bring her in. The examiner of statutory rules has raised no concerns with regard to the technical aspects of the rule, and the rule is subject to the negative resolution procedure. Before I ask if members are content with the rule, I see Deirdre has her hand up. Go ahead, Deirdre.
Sorry, Chair, I'm content enough with the rule in terms of what it's doing, but it was just on the back of the meeting that we did do in February. Obviously, there were concerns in terms of the electronic tagging and how quick that would be brought in onto this new contract, and obviously in between times as well. I know we had Michael McAvoy in at the meeting because obviously we had concerns in terms of the operation of this scheme going forward, and even on the back of how the last scheme, some of the difficulties that had with the old contract. But I'm keen on the back of the transformation bid monies that's been allocated for this in the autumn. If we could schedule an updated briefing when it's appropriate with Michael McAvoy, just to get an update then once this new organisation comes into play, and with the transformation monies, then what the whole area of tagging is going to look like going forward. So it's just when it's appropriate to schedule that. I'd be keen the autumn getting into the winter period, whatever time allows us, that we look at that again as a committee. Thanks.
Or do you want to come on that?
No.
You're okay.
No. Well, now you mention it, it's a time frame between GS4 and Buddy not actually completing the handover. Plus the tags themselves, they don't take into account people's disabilities or people who've got skin conditions or edema or something like that there. Small thing, but just something to
I think
up.
that's stuff that we can follow up then.
Yeah.
In the winter, if we agree to Deirdre's proposal, so our members content with that, then that we would follow up. Then that'll afford everybody a chance to just see where we are with that. Okay, that's fair enough. Right, members, the rule is where am I? Down at the bottom. Sorry, apologies. So, is everybody content with the statutory rule?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Given that you're content, and I'm going to put the question formally. So the question is that the Committee for Justice considered SR 2025-80, the Electronic Monitoring Requirements Responsible Officer Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2025, and has no objection to the rule. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 9 is PSNI retention and disposal schedule, which can be found at page 354 of the pack. The disposal schedule is required to be laid before the Assembly under Section 8.2 of the Public Records Act Northern Ireland 2023, and in accordance with the rules of the Disposal Documents Order 1925 by the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, the retention and disposal schedule is subject to the negative resolution procedure. The PSNI retention and disposal schedule identifies records and information that's going to be managed, stored, retained, destroyed or transferred, if appropriate, for permanent preservation to the Public Record Office. The schedule specifies the minimum requirements for the retention and disposal of records and information. Before I bring in the Deputy Chair again, could I ask a couple of things? I would like to understand how they differentiate between, in practical terms, between permanent and indefinite retention. And the other thing it would be helpful to understand at this stage is, are there any changes from the previous, if they could highlight the changes from the previous schedules and whether or not the policing board is content? Those would be my asks. Would members agree to that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Deirdre?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I have a few queries as well. So it's just around the in terms of the categories of disposal and the financial info, which says is usually destroyed after 7 years. But it's around the permanent retention within the PSNI for admin, legislative, investigative or legacy purposes. So again, I would just want to know how this squares with the retention periods that are outlined in the new Justice Bill for 75, 50 and 25, in terms of, because some of it constitutes as personal data. So it's just around, will these retention periods then change in light of that new Justice Bill, or if there's any contradiction in any of this at the moment? And again, just the same question in terms of the indefinite retention around premises and relevant forensic databases. So again, how does that square with the retention periods that are set out in the Justice Bill? And then the other issue around some records, it says such as child sexual abuse and exploitation and domestic abuse and violence incidents, which will be retained up to a period of 100 years of age, or to be reviewed every 10 years. I suppose I just wanted to understand in that 10-year review period what the retention looks like then after those reviews. You know, is there more documents that aren't being retained than are in the 10-year review? So if there's any kind of light that they can shine on that. And just the last week query, it's on page 47 in terms of the donor finger palm prints for the ground truth database. Again, they talk about permanent retention. So again, it's just the anomalies then. How can they be addressed between the department and the PSNI? And again, how does that sit with the new justice bill in terms of retention periods? So just a wee bit more clarity on those areas.
Does anybody know how often the schedule comes? No, I mean, I know there are certain parts of it where they indicate they're going to look at it again once the bill has passed. I mean, there's stuff about that, but let's put the questions to them anyway. Are members content that we would do that?
Yeah, content.
That's great, thank you, and we'll see what they say then. Right. What do I see? There's another part of this actually. No, never mind. We'll not do that. Agenda item 10 is Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act, Northern Ireland 2021. It's a report in section 2029 and it's a written paper from the department. Members, can you turn to page 439 of your pack? The department has provided the committee with a draft of the report that it's required to lay before the Assembly under section 29 of the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act, Northern Ireland 2021, and the department has advised that it intends to lay the finalised report before the Assembly in the coming weeks. They've set out 3 issues to address to improve the approach to delivering legal support services to victims of domestic abuse, and the state that actions relating to each of these have been incorporated into the draft enabling access to justice delivery plan. We're due to have an oral evidence session with officials on domestic abuse issues that's going to include our post-legislative scrutiny of the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act, and that has been scheduled for the 19th of June. So are you content to note the papers until that meeting, or is there anything further you'd want to raise or require? No, content to note for now?
Yeah.
Thank you. Agenda item 11 is Enabling Access to Justice programme, and it's about taxation. Could you turn to page 619 and 620 of the meeting pack? You'll see there that the department has advised that it hoped to provide the committee with a draft consultation paper regarding taxation reform, with particular reference to the development of proposals regarding remuneration of High Court bail applications. However, the department has advised that the consultation will not now be issued before the summer recess. Are you content to note that paper unless you have any further information or clarification you require? Deirdre?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's really just to highlight the point potentially to the department, just to see when they are going to do the consultation. And it would be advisable not to do it over the summer. If it's not ready before the summer, is it likely to happen in autumn? So I suppose just a wee point of clarity around that, maybe, when they're going to do it.
Yeah, the other thing that slightly concerns me is, you know, is this a consultation that's going to end up relating to taxation issues that are contained within the bill? Because if it is, we're back to a circumstance where stuff's already in the bill and then they're consulting on it, as opposed to consulting and then letting that formulate the policy. Deirdre?
Sorry, I'm trying to get the unmute. Yeah, no, I would have the same concern, particularly where the department has set out significant budgetary challenges in terms of taxation. And I suppose that's the bit that I'm, you know, is that a forewarning or why they're moving the taxation issue in terms of the proposals in the Justice Bill? So I would be keen, that's why I'm keen to know when they're going to consult and kind of what repercussions then this potentially has for the Justice Bill and for that element of it.
Okay, members agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you. Agenda item 12 then is correspondence. There's a correspondence memo and 7 items of correspondence starting at page 621 of your pack. I'm going to draw your attention to 2 of the items, and then you'll have an opportunity to comment on any other items of correspondence in which you've got a particular interest. Firstly, item 12.2, that's correspondence from the DOJ at page 624, and that includes copies of 2 reports regarding the economic and social costs of crime and the economic and social costs of paramilitary activity. Anybody have anything they want to flag up on that? Do you require any further information or clarification on anything? You know, obviously some of this came up in Jacqui, fairly shocking statistics there. Let me just see. Yeah, so cost of crime, what, 3.4 billion was it? Cost of reoffending, 373 million. And cost of paramilitarism is in there somewhere too. I had taken a picture and I can't. Yeah, between 608 million and 733 million. These are not small amounts of money.
Would it be possible to get a breakdown of the areas where the spend is, so we can have an idea of where the trouble spots are?
Yeah, we can try and see what they say. Members content that we would ask for that, see if we can get any further detail?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, sorry.
Yes, Deirdre.
No, it's just pertaining, because as you say, I mean, the figures are huge when you're looking at these 2 issues. And some of this might dovetail into the engagement we're going to have with the Permanent Secretary in terms of the speeding up justice, you know, and the kind of vision and priorities for the department. So I think just even, you know, to highlight maybe to the Permanent Secretary that we maybe want to refer to these reports. I mean, once they're published, I imagine they're going to have a bit of media focus around them as well. But it's just what we're going to do, you know, to deal with them. And I just take on board the point that you raised in terms of the tackling paramilitarism aspect. If there's too many overarching strategies and strands and it's too siloed, are we really having the impact in terms of outcomes that actually starts to change some of these figures? So just maybe to highlight another potential area that we'll want to raise with the Permanent Secretary when we get him in.
Yeah. Members agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Thank you. And also those are fairly meaty reports, so it gives us another chance to get through them, you know, in a bit more detail. Let's see where I am. Item 12.5, members, is correspondence from the Committee for Finance at page 740 to 778 of the pack, and includes copies of SL1s relating to commencement of powers for the Legal Services Oversight Commissioner. The Committee for Finance agreed to share the SL1s with us, given the cross-cutting nature of them and the Commissioner's oversight of the legal profession. And the Committee for Finance is seeking the views of the Justice Committee on whether the Office of Legal Services Oversight Commissioner might be more appropriately located under the Justice remit. So while the Finance Committee was content with the policy proposals, it has sought further information from the Department on what mechanism will be used to set the levy for the Law Society and the Bar Council, estimates of the levy, estimated financial implications to set up and operate the Commissioner's Office once fully established, and the views of the Law Society and the Bar of Northern Ireland on legislation and whether there's content that all necessary structures are in place have also been sought. We should ask the Committee for Finance to share the responses from the Department of Finance, the Law Society and the Bar with us when they've received those. Can I initially get your agreement for that, please? I am worried about this. I think that, you know, it's another commission, and there seem to be an awful lot of these coming forward. I think we have witnessed that it's very difficult to hold some of these commissions and commissioners to account, and we've struggled with that. We've struggled to see the accountability mechanisms within this. I think I would want reassurances that some of these quangos can't be expanded. it seems the department is currently paying something like 35,000 for this. This is Department of Finance. But that's because the Commissioner works from home. Once you add in staff, premises, and all of those things, you know, that cost could mount considerably. They haven't yet indicated how they're going to levy the profession. The profession has told us they are struggling to keep their doors open, and now they're going to be charged to regulate themselves, despite the fact. Sorry, they're not going to be charged to regulate themselves. They're going to be charged to be regulated again in another way, despite the fact that they are already regulated and they already pay the Law Society to do this. So I have some concerns around expansion of this and how it's duplicated. I also don't know whether or not there is a review of efficiency and effectiveness built into this next commission. So I've got a few questions that I would like to understand, and I also would need to know from our department whether or not there's a conflict of interest for them if they take it on in any shape or form, bearing in mind, I suppose, that their proposals under managing the legal aid budget and so on themselves. So those are issues that I would like to see raised. Does anybody have anything? Deirdre, raise your hand up for this.
No, it wasn't. I wanted to raise item 12.3, Chair, but I think on this, yeah, I would concur with what you have said. And even I suppose where the functions go, because that would have been a concern I had in terms of independence for the oversight. And obviously that would have been decided in terms of what functions, what department takes at an executive level, so even what their view would be. And I don't know whether it's even worthwhile even hearing from Marion herself or not at this point, or maybe we just get the clarification that you have asked for first and then see where we go from there.
Yeah, I think let's get the clarification first and then can we see before we bring people in. I'm conscious that I don't like to bring people in if we've nothing to put to them. So let's kind of get the background information first. Are members agreed to that? Okay, yeah. Thank you. Deirdre, you want in on a separate issue?
Yeah, it was just on 12.3, Chair. It was obviously the report from the Executive Committee in terms of the disablement payment scheme, so just the pension scheme, and obviously this did come up previously in our packs. If you remember, some of the groups on the ground had written to both committees, and obviously when you read the Hansard report, there are some serious concerns. I mean, obviously the main point of the scheme is handled within TEO, but obviously in terms of capita, the Department of Justice has a role in that. And I'm concerned in some of the stories I'm hearing of assessments in her victims and survivors, you know, who have clear physical injuries, that's clearly noted in their medical records, that they're being asked to strip as part of these assessments, and a concern that that is re-traumatizing. So I would be keen, even sure at this point, if the Hansard could be shared with the department in terms of them looking at the areas that have been raised as part of that evidence session in TEO that pertain to the department's responsibilities, and ask the department for a response. And then to see, you know, depending on what they're saying, is there something that the committee then can look at, you know, that's under the responsibility of the Justice Department. But I am concerned in terms of just some of the issues I'm hearing in terms of capita and the rollout of the scheme in terms of the assessments. So I'm not sure if other people, you know, are hearing similar concerns or not, or what the thought of the Hansard, but I would be keen to get the department's view on what was raised in the TEO committee that pertains to the department. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I'd absolutely be on board with that. Yeah, the issues that I've heard haven't been around removal of clothing, but certainly around re-traumatisation. And I know from the Hansard that there was reference to sometimes that's because of the result. The issues that I have heard about re-traumatisation were absolutely not to do with the result. They were to do with the process and assessment. And people having to relive what were very traumatic events in their lives, some of them in their childhood, and having to go through all of that again has actually led to very detrimental impact on their adult life now, and has put them into downward spirals. So I think we should send that on and highlight those concerns to the Department of Justice and seek their views on it. Members content? Members, could I just go back 1 second to the LCM where there's talk, it's the policing and crime one, policing and crime bill, and it's the business about there may be a second LCM coming forward. At the point at which a second LCM comes forward, we could be a bit pushed for time to give consideration to that because of summer recess and so on. So could I ask that in the interim period and in the intervening period, we would ask the Health Committee to keep us apprised of its considerations on that issue, so that we've made some moves and we're kind of pre-briefed on some of that stuff. Would members be agreed to that? Yeah, thank you. Apologies for going back there, but I omitted to raise that point. Anything else within the correspondence people want to raise? Content to note all the rest on the memo? Thank you. Forward work programme is at page 837. It is likely that some of that will change because we know that there's some folks that aren't going to be available, so you're content to note it subject to any changes that may be required. The other thing I would like to flag up is yesterday I went to an event run by the Open University called Why Riot, and it's about youth work that has been ongoing across the Belfast constituencies and slightly beyond. I was blown away by what I heard, and I have zero doubt that youth work and that programme, which is actually a course from which people graduate, has kept people out of the criminal justice system, has kept young people out. We were hearing their stories of alienation and the changes the course had brought about in people's lives, getting people back into education, getting them apprenticeships, improving family relations. But the key thing for me was that without some of these interventions, there's no doubt these children would have been at interfaces, they would have been engaged in rioting and everything that takes them down the criminal justice spiral, which leads then to a revolving door for them probably for the rest of their lives. So I think it would be really worthwhile. I'd love the committee to hear about it if there was something that we could schedule in at some stage, not within the next few weeks, but at some stage in the next year, if we could look at kind of bringing those in and hearing from those youth workers about the difference that programme made. Would members be interested in that?
Yeah, I think it sounds good. Yeah.
Thank you. Agenda item 14 is chairperson's business. I have one issue to raise, which is just that the bar has invited me to attend an exhibition in their premises. Are members okay that I would attend that? That's great, thank you. Item 15 is any other business. Does anybody have anything they want to raise? No. Agenda item 16 then is date, time, place of next meeting. So the next meeting is going to take place in here at 2 o'clock next Thursday in advance of the roundtable event in the Long Gallery at 3. Just a reminder, your pack then is going to come out on Tuesday, not Monday. And there will also be briefing papers for us for the roundtable event. Morris and Justin, you weren't here earlier on when we asked people to confirm whether or not they're going to be in attendance at the roundtable event. Yep. Could you two please flag up? Justin, can you hear me? Could you raise your hand if you intend to be at the roundtable event next week? Well, we'll get Justin to people can follow with Justin. Morris, you are going to be there, are you? Okay. Right, members, thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.
Committee room